Buenas tardes a todos. Sean todos bienvenidos a una nueva actividad que organiza la Universidad Católica de Valencia. En este caso, una actividad que organiza colaborativamente con la Universidad de Valencia y que tiene como referente pues, al profesor Altman y a quien ha sido, digamos, el promotor de este evento, que es el profesor Lastra. Para mí es un orgullo poder presentar un acto de esta naturaleza, en donde, a pesar de las fechas, la filosofía perenne está presente y la filosofía de Platón pues tiene todo su alcance, especialmente para quienes nos dedicamos, os dedicáis a la enseñanza. Es una oportunidad única la de contar con el profesor Altman en Europa, en España, en la ciudad de Valencia. No hemos querido desaprovechar esa oportunidad y es para mí un motivo de enorme honor, de enorme orgullo poder albergar esta universidad, acoger esta universidad como sede para un evento de esta naturaleza. Profesor Lastra, tiene la palabra.
Muchas gracias, Ginés. Hemos dado ya esta mañana los agradecimientos ahora con el decano, el profesor Ginés Marco. Solo me queda deciros que esta es la última actividad de este año de la Escuela de Filosofía en colaboración con las distintas entidades que estamos teniendo. El año que viene, en septiembre, empezaremos de nuevo en nuestros cursos. Este tendrá su continuidad en nuestro propósito que he mencionado esta mañana de seguir con los diálogos sobre los diálogos de Platón, que empezaremos hacia el mes de noviembre en colaboración con la Biblioteca Valenciana. El profesor Negrete y yo mismo dirigiremos una serie de encuentros sobre la República de Platón que nos llevarán aproximadamente 2 o 3 meses. Gracias a todos por estar aquí. Es un acto académico, así que ahora tendremos la intervención final, la más bonita, sin duda, del profesor Altman, y después habrá un turno de intervención para que cuando nos vayamos a ir nadie se quede con ninguna pregunta que le hubiera gustado realizar, porque en septiembre tenemos que volver a dar clases de filosofía a todos y seguramente lo que hemos aprendido hoy nos va a resultar muy útil para dar clase a nuestra nueva generación de estudiantes. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Profesor Altman, Will, as you like it.
There. So it's a great honor for me to be here. Thank you very much, Professor. I'd like to thank the university, especially the Instituto Universitario de Investigación Filosofía Edith Stein, a great hero of mine. Here at the university, it's a great honor to be here, sir. Thank you very much. Also would like to thank the Universidad de Valencia, the Departamento de Filosofía, the Ediciones Apeiron, Cefire, Generalitat Valencia, and the very delightful Escuela de Filosofía de Ateneo. And finally, and not least, La Torre del Virrey, which brings us again to Professor Antonio Lastra. I think I'll just read this. What philosophy, what Plato, is it on really? Feels strange. What Plato has taught us about the way to teach philosophy. It is impossible for me to come to Valencia without, it's okay. It is impossible for me to come to Valencia without being interrupted by a cell phone. It is impossible for me to come to Valencia without paying tribute to Juan Aurora Perea, my professor at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, the small city in the United States where he died, far from home, in 1983. Aurora Perea was born in Tortella in 1897 and was a graduate of the University of Barcelona. Although he lived most of his life in exile, his love for Spain was infectious. It is probably because of that love that Valencia early became the city of my dreams, long before Professor Antonio Lastra, translator of my great-great-grandfather's best friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and warm admirer of Frank Capra, the best of our movie makers, began making it possible for me to be speaking to you today, a humbling honor for which I am deeply grateful. Rhoda Perea taught me a course called Art, Style and Worldview in my junior year in the spring of 1976. He was already old, a professor emeritus, and as things turned out, he had only 7 more years to live. But like all great teachers, and of course I have Plato primarily in mind here, he lives on in the memory of his students. The thesis of his course was that modern art was derived from pre-Socratic philosophy. This amazing thesis would have arrested the attention of any auditor. Increasing the strangeness of this already very old man with his strong accent was his capacity to burn into one's head by repetition his most basic points. While his proof that cubism derived from the ancient Pythagoreans was memorable enough, what he said about Parmenides became indelible. In introducing each of the pre-Socratics, Rora Perea would pose the question, who exists? Who is the being? Now in English, we would never say this or anything like it. We would rather say, what is it that exists? Or something like that. For Parmenides, the answer seemed almost as comical as the answer. Who is being? Parmenides say, being exists. Being is the being. And then came the most amazing part. He would then comment, very, very, very great man, Parmenides. Plato called him the great Parmenides. These words would later revolutionize the way I read Plato's Timaeus, for I suddenly realized, thanks to my beloved professor, that the discourse Plato had placed in the mouth of Timaeus is not what Francis MacDonald Cornford called Plato's cosmology. Instead, it was the equivalent of Parmenides' cosmological way of opinion, which the great Parmenides himself had already called a deceptive cosmos of words. Rora Perea's love of Spain was everywhere evident, and I had long since heard from Gilbert and Sullivan about the family pride of a Spaniard from Aragon, so I took this in stride. But Rora Perea offered a memorable proof of Spain's greatness when he spoke of what he called the 4 great modern myths. These were Don Quixote, the myth of idealism, Faust, the myth of science, Hamlet, the myth of doubt, and Don Juan, the myth of motion. Now at the time, I had no idea, and I mean no idea, of what he meant by the last of these, and very little about the other 3. But I do remember clearly that after trying to explain, he would slyly point out, with evident pride, that 2 of these 4 myths were Spanish. It was only while preparing this talk that I realized how Don Juan and Don Quixote together teach the exact same lesson I had learned from Rora Perea many years later about the great Parmenides. Plato's cosmological Timaeus deforms Plato's unchanging being by placing things in motion. And the soaring idealism of the middle books of the Republic is deleted when Socrates narrates the merely Republic-like story he had heard the day that he had told Critias, Hermocrates, Timaeus, and that elusive missing 4th the day before. Rora Perea's Spain had proved that the myth of motion could only have arisen in the same place where Don Quixote held fast to the eternal, all empirical evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. In any case, it was somehow in the dialogue between these 2 myths, in their self-standing and antithetical autonomy, that I could see Platonism. For Don Juan is precisely not the man of ideals. He never asks, could I imagine myself married to this woman? For Don Quixote, the opposite was true. No woman could be other than the perfect one for him. As for Plato, he found a way to teach both the myth of motion and the myth of idealism, and thanks to the train wreck that occurs when someone asks themselves, as too few people do, how Socrates, that exemplar of all the virtues, could possibly have upheld the doctrine that virtue is knowledge, while also insisting even more frequently on Socratic ignorance. For that reason, then, it is actually Plato who proves to be the inventor of the myth of doubt and the myth of science as well. So, with all due respect to the two myths of my beloved teacher, of Aurora Perea's beloved Spain, Plato deserves credit for all four of these modern myths. It is therefore something more than the myth of idealism that makes Cervantes such a great Platonist. It was Cicero who discovered and revealed Plato's open secret, written everywhere in the dialogues, and yet still invisible to most every Plato scholar today. In his De Oratore, Cicero's Crassus observes that Plato was never more eloquent than when ridiculing orators in the Gorgias. Now, since I see very few smiles about that, let's just hammer the point a little bit more. That Plato goes down in history as, as against imitation, the man that spent all of his writing career imitating Socrates, attacking imitation, making eloquent speeches against rhetoric, using poetic images to justify the elimination of poetry, banishing Homer from his city, and yet filling his dialogues with Homer's discourses, etc., making long speeches in favor of brevity, remembering long speeches while claiming to have a poor memory, etc., etc., etc. The performative self-contradiction is Plato's stock in trade, and anybody that doesn't think that Plato uses this method should repair themselves to Aristotle and leave Plato alone, because they're not temperamentally suited. Where was I? When Don Quixote is challenged to offer his opinion on whether the true hero is a man of words or actions, the eloquent speech he offers in praise of noble deeds is the sign that Cervantes was a true Platonist. And this he makes clear, beginning with his preface, for nothing could be more Platonic than a preface that contains a dialogue between the author and a friend, where the former, in other words, the author, is complaining that he is unable to write a preface. Perhaps Plato's decision to follow Republic with Timaeus is itself a species of this same phenomenon, for the one is contradicting the other and is even contradicting itself. For example, on solid geometry and the void. I discussed that this morning at the University of Valencia. But it is rather in the more delightfully quixotic or performative self-contradictions that Plato excels. Oh, so I'd already done this. The greatest poet among philosophers is still reckoned as poetry's foe. He has so effectively imitated Socrates, attacking imitation, that we still continue to believe him. And this veritable fountain of eloquence has managed to persuade all but a few of us that he was rhetoric's enemy. This is where Plato shines, not merely in the soaring idealism that locates the eternal and unchanging idea of the good outside of the cave, to which, despite their evident inferiority and the life-threatening danger the cavemen posed to the philosopher, it is our solemn and Platonic duty to return. By saying this, it is by no means my intent to equalize the sublime teaching of the allegory of the cave with the many deliberate jokes with which Plato enlivens his dialogues, especially by his use of what I call performative self-contradiction, as in, I don't know how to speak English. No, Platonism is no joke, and Plato is a Platonist. But he is also playful, and he makes it a delightful experience to learn the stern message at the center of his thought. On January 24th, less than a month ago, I finished the last of 5 volumes on the reading order of Plato's dialogues. And I can tell you it was a sad experience too, because there's never anything else that I'll ever write that will mean as much to me as writing about Plato. Although written last, it is actually volume 1 and covers the elementary dialogues Plato wrote for beginners. Since my primary purpose was to challenge the hegemony of the order of composition paradigm by reviving the ancient conception of reading order, I embodied this difference between them in my own works. In other words, by writing last the volume that stands first in the reading order, showing that it would have been easy for Plato, who's a whole hell of a lot smarter than I am, to do something similar. To take an example, Plato's Hippias Major, oh yeah, this is a good one. To take an example, Plato's Hippias Major has the feel and form of what modern scholars call an early or Socratic dialogue, and yet it seems to point unmistakably toward a fully Platonist idea of beauty. As a result, its authenticity has long been challenged, and it continues to be. And there are great authorities, both living and dead, who believe that Greater Hippias was not written by Plato, but was written during Plato's lifetime by one of his younger or youthful admirers, already familiar with the master's later theory. The insistence of these critics that its author was a youth arises from the dialogue's broad humor, where Socrates pretends that he has an annoying neighbor who would ridicule and possibly even beat him if he, Socrates, were to give such silly answers as Hippias has just been giving him. Now, it is obvious to everyone except Hippias that Socrates is lying. He is himself his rude and aggressive double. And although the humor involved has rightly been called juvenile, it has been wrongly regarded as unworthy of Plato. Plato's Hippias Major was not written by a youth. It was written for the youth. And that's why it combines humor with unmistakable indications of what is to come, i.e., the idea of beauty, revealed by Diotima in the Banquete. I offer no speculations as to when Plato wrote Hippias Major. I am agnostic about the order of composition, the problem that has obsessed Plato's scholars since the early 19th century, but that he wrote it for beginners, this I attempt to prove. At the heart of my project stands the curricular hypothesis, i.e., it explores the possibility that Plato's dialogues, taught in a progressive order derived from Plato's own clues and based on sound pedagogical principles, was the curriculum of Plato's Academy. It is amazing how little we know about the Academy. Was it free? How old were the students who attended it? How long did they stay there? Was it a day school, or did they sleep on the grounds? Were there grade levels? Did you graduate? About all these and much more, we are in the dark. And that proves to be a blessing, because in response to this tabula rasa, my approach begins with two things that we do know. The founder of the Academy was unquestionably a teacher. And over the course of more than 2 millennia, his delightful and instructive dialogues have proved themselves, from Spain to Japan, from Athens to America, to be eminently teachable, and have repeatedly been used to introduce students to philosophy. From these two unquestionable truths, I derive what seems to me to be an entirely obvious proposal, that these eminently teachable dialogues constituted what Plato taught in the Academy. The amazing thing is that this common sense suggestion, based on two premises that nobody questions, proves to be original in the long history of Platonism. And that means that nobody has considered the possibility that what Plato taught was his dialogues. But regardless of what Plato did during his lifetime, his dialogues endure. And vastly more important than the historical question of whether Plato used his dialogues to teach in the academy, how he did so if he did, and whether, in addition to them, there was some other unwritten instruction, either about the dialogues or about matters extraneous to all of them, is the fact that the dialogues now consist what I will call the curriculum of the eternal academy. Whether or not the dialogues were the historical academy's curriculum, and there is no evidence that proves that they weren't, since we have no proof that anything else was, they are in any case the only means through which its founder now continues to teach. Therefore, my reading order project will, I hope, someday travel under the title Plato the Teacher, a study in 5 volumes entitled, as arranged in reading order, not by order of composition, Ascent to the Beautiful, Ascent to the Good, The Crisis of the Republic, The Guardians in Action, and The Guardians on Trial. Now, since I have just listed the titles of my own books, it would certainly be a crime for me not to do the same for Plato's. So, here's the reading order of his dialogues, thank you, sir, as I have reconstructed it. I got it in my head. So, the Protagoras. If you know any Greek, you know that proton means first. So it's a heck of a good title for the dialogue that stands first, especially since it begins with some kid coming before daylight and knocking on his door. Protagoras, Alcibiades Major. All the ancients understood that the Alcibiades Major was the right place to begin. Damascius wrote a commentary, Proclus wrote a commentary, Olympiodorus wrote a commentary, and Iamblichus is the first that says it. Alcibiades Minor, nobody thinks he wrote that, and boy did he. It directly contradicts one of the arguments used in the Protagoras, where Socrates tries to prove the identity of wisdom and temperance by making the ridiculous claim that each thing has one and only one opposite. The Rival Lovers stands between the 2 Alcibiades dialogues and Hippias Major and Hippias Minor. And since Hippias Minor is about Homer, it naturally leads into my favorite dialogue, the Immortal Ion, where the only way that Socrates can prove that Ion does not have a techne is by proving that he must be divinely inspired by the most beautiful speech in Plato, where he argues that the poet is a light and winged thing that cannot compose until he is divinely inspired, and that he comes to us, as it were, from the honey-flowing rills and gardens and groves of the Muses, bringing with them the honey and what they say is true. For a light and winged thing is a poet. Anyway. Remember, this is the guy that hated poetry, okay? This is the guy that hated rhetoric. At the end of the Ion, it breaks into politics for the first time. I'm not going to talk about that, but Menexenus is the next dialogue that follows. And then comes the Great Symposium. Now, I regard the Symposium as the culmination of what I'm calling freshman year in the academy. It's very, very closely connected to the Protagoras, so that Protagoras and Symposium have many, many common features, above all, to name but a few, Alcibiades, Pausanias, Eryximachus, Agathon, and there's one more. Who would I leave off? Aristophanes. Oh, that's the joke. Aristophanes actually is not in the Protagoras, but when you realize that all the other guys in the Symposium are in the Protagoras, you realize that Aristophanes is there too, because the Protagoras is funny once you start to understand it. So, my claim then is that after you reach the Symposium, you see the Protagoras again, because you're now a sophomore in the academy. You're now in the 10th grade. A new class comes in. This time, you see it again. And you see it differently this time. You see the symposium, and the symposium introduces the great problem that will guide us up through the Republic. And that is whether Plato is right, that the idea of the good is the good, or whether Aristoteles was right in saying that eudaimonia is the good. And this is exactly the problem that is dealt with in the Lysis, the Euthydemus, the Lecis, and the Charmides, before we reach the pivot of the second year, the gigantic and powerful Gorgias, one of Plato's most brilliant dialogues, and the first dialogue that prepares you for reading the 10 books of the Republic. The Gorgias is then followed by one that nobody wants to be real, which is the Theages, where the divine inspiration that will come back in the Meno appears. It's the first time he talks about his divine sign, his daimonion, and then the Meno. That's the end of the second year. And the Meno works very well with the Protagoras because the Protagoras says, can virtue be taught? Should I be saying all this in English, by the way, because it's not written there? Is it okay? The Protagoras offers a way that virtue can be taught without being taught, because you don't actually teach it. You provoke the student to remember it. And then the Cleitophon, which introduces the mighty Republic. Split the Republic in half, put the letters in there. The Republic is the end of the third year. And then the most difficult, Timaeus, Critias, Phaedrus, Parmenides, Philebus, Cratylus, Theaetetus. These are the most challenging of Plato's dialogues, I think. It looks like you're on familiar ground with the Phaedrus, but you stepped into another world, to say nothing about the Timaeus. And of course, Parmenides and Philebus, these are famously difficult dialogues. You then see Protagoras again. Remember that in Theaetetus, by the way, just a few little hints. Protagoras is proclaimed to be dead in the Meno. Protagoras is brought back to life in the Theaetetus. Since I mentioned the Phaedrus, one of the beauties of this is that if you can imagine seeing the Protagoras again and again as you grow through the curriculum, it doesn't take a PhD to realize you would see different things in it every time. Remember that the so-called Tübingen school, you cannot read an article out of Tübingen that does not hammer the critique of writing, the Schriftkritik of the Phaedrus, taking it literally. The written word cannot get you to philosophy. This is why there's an unwritten doctrine. The true teaching cannot be put into words. And of course, what actually Plato says is that the problem with the written text is that it keeps saying the very same thing to everybody that reads it. To which I respond is, have you ever taught a Platonic dialogue? Have you ever actually taught one? Because nobody that has taught a Platonic dialogue more than once could possibly think that you always find the same thing in it every time you read or teach it. You're always finding new things in Plato, always finding new emphases, new jokes, new insights, new ways of thinking about it. And don't think that Plato didn't know that about his own work, because that was its purpose. Anyway, I guess we've gotten up to the Theaetetus. And then, the four famous dialogues, Euthyphro, Apology of Socrates, Crito, and Phaedo, only inserted between those four, in the interstices between those four dialogues then. Between Euthyphro and Apology, nobody can deny that the sophist and the statesman belong. It gets a little more iffy with what happens between Apology and Crito, and my claim that the Hipparchus and the Minos, that both take place with very, very short dialogues with a very simple young man who is not even named, it's a little harder to persuade anybody that that is the jailer who breaks into tears in the Phaedo and says, Socrates, the time has come to drink the poison now. And I know that you, unlike all the other people that come here, you're not going to give me a hard time, because just in our short time together, I've seen that you are the justest and kindest of men. And then the young man bursts into tears and leaves the room, and Socrates says, "What a great kid. What an excellent kid." I had a few conversations with him. Where? That's the hipparchos and the minos. I had a few and then the Crito, the great speech of the laws, where the laws recommend, hey, if you were going to leave Athens, Socrates, you would have left a long time ago. You would have gone to Crete or Sparta, cities that you say are well governed. And of course, the Athenian stranger shows up as an old guy in Crete, talking to a Cretan and a Spartan. And that's the laws and the eponymus. So that just as statesman and sophist are between Euthyphro and apology, that the jail cell dialogues are between apology and Crito, and the Crete dialogues are between. By the way, one of the beauties of Homer and Plato is that the entire basis for the story on which the laws and the eponymus is based is a passage in Homer's Odyssey, where somebody asks him, and I believe it's his wife, asks him where he's from. And he says, "I'm from Crete." And he gives some phony baloney name. And he proceeds to tell a story about this cave of Minos in Crete. And at the end of the speech, Homer comments, "And thus he spoke, speaking many false things that seemed to be true." This is what Plato can do. He can speak many falsehoods that seem to be true. Anyway, so I think that's it. Oh, and ending with the Phaedo. Because what better place to end the story? Okay. When I was a kid, I thought I would someday write a single book about all of these dialogues, and as a direct result, I never even started that book. It was only when I realized that I could write a book about Plato's Republic, for I had based my adult life on the proposition that justice requires the philosopher to return to the cave, that the solution came to me. It was not one, but 3 books I needed to write, beginning with the one on Republic, and I began writing it the very next morning. Next would follow the more difficult volume on the late, or rather post-Republic dialogues, where Plato is generally thought, on the basis of order of composition, of course, to have outgrown his own Platonism. Finally, I would save the best for last, the early or pre-Republic dialogues that included Ion, my personal favorite. It was while writing the second volume that it became obvious that it would require 2 thick books to cover the late dialogues, and when my publisher refused to consider treating the 2 as one, it became necessary, given the centrality of Plato's Republic, the pivot on which the reading order turns, to start planning for a 5, not a 3-volume study. Since the maxim of my action had been from the start to save the best for last, it was not immediately obvious to me when I started writing about Protagoras and Alcibiades that I was breaking my own rule. But I soon enough realized the error and wrote the second volume first. And at the end of the first volume, the one to be entitled Ascent to the Beautiful, Plato the Teacher, and the Pre-Republic Dialogues from Protagoras to Symposium, I added, for the first and last time, an epilogue, which was entitled Imagining the Academy. And that is what I propose to do today. For the way I am currently imagining the Academy, no matter how speculative it is, and indeed must be, may possibly contain some useful lessons about what Plato has taught us about the way to teach philosophy. Such, at least, is my hope. Now, it all begins with Protagoras. Although most previous attempts to imagine what Plato taught in the Academy have been based on the 5 mathematical sciences described by Socrates in Republic 7, Socrates' far more vivid description of his visit to the Garden of Callias, where a large number of students, seated on benches, watches the spectacle of an intellectual boxing match between Socrates and Protagoras, emerges as a better image once we consider the amazing place of Protagoras in the reading order. Like the ancient Neoplatonists who regarded Alcibiades Major as the appropriate point of entry into Plato's thought, I too regard this brilliant and elementary dialogue as the right place to begin the study of Plato. The problem is, then, that one gradually discovers an ever-growing list of reasons why Alcibiades Major actually takes place after Protagoras, in a dramatic sense, beginning with the fact that the outer frame of Protagoras makes very evident Socrates' ongoing pursuit of the handsome Alcibiades, who of course is the hero of Alcibiades Major and Alcibiades Minor. I qualify frame with outer here because once Socrates ends the direct dialogue with his friend and embarks upon the long speech in which he recounts in great detail the events that have just taken place in Callias's garden, the first thing he describes is how a courageous and impetuous youth named Hippocrates, on fire to learn from Protagoras how to become a clever speaker, comes knocking on his door before dawn to persuade Socrates to accompany him on a visit to the famous sophist. After Socrates proves to Hippocrates that it is a mighty, stupid project to entrust one's soul to someone about whom you know nothing and who may well harm your most precious possession, the two of them nevertheless decide to go. And after an amusing conversation with a eunuch, who at first resists opening the door to them, they enter into a lavishly described theatrical set, described in great detail with actors, scenery, and a full chorus already dancing. Fortunately, the theatrical element in Protagoras has long been recognized, but it is more than a play. Thanks to the spectacle that the chorus is watching, and sometimes applauding, the internal audience that includes not only Hippocrates, Callias, Hippias, Prodicus, and Critias, but also Alcibiades, Phaedrus, Eryximachus, Pausanias, and Agathon, all five of whom will reappear in the symposium. It is a play within a play. And when we recall that Socrates is actually describing all of this to the unnamed friend in the outer frame, it is more than that. It is a play within a play within a play. Quite apart, then, from the dialogue's confusing content, for it leaves us wondering whether virtue is one thing or many things, whether virtue can be taught, whether Socrates could possibly be serious about the poem of Simonides, or in claiming that, let's see if I got this right, since it is noble to go to war, and since what is noble is good, and since what is pleasant is good, it is therefore pleasant to go to war. For nobody would ever voluntarily choose to do what they knew to be bad for them, and a failure to choose the pleasant is a sign of ignorance. And therefore, somebody would go to war because it's more pleasant to do so. And they would know that because nobody would possibly decide not to get themselves machine gunned on the Western Front because, I think you get my point. Its form is as complex as the direct dialogue in the Alcibiades Major. Its form is as complex as the direct dialogue in Alcibiades Major is simple. In the course of that dialogue, by contrast, Socrates makes it clear that even though dying for the safety of others in war is noble, that it requires a trick argument based on fallacy and equivocation to show that doing so is good for the one who does the dying. My solution to the problem posed by the priority of Protagoras, then, is that it was performed as a play for beginners. On the first day, they entered the academy, but that once having been alternately confused, baffled, and delighted by what they had seen, their studies began with a line-by-line reading of the Alcibiades Major and the elementary dialogues that follow it, all in preparation for reading first Symposium and then the more difficult dialogues beyond. In Republic 7, Socrates says that instruction in dialectic should be withheld from the city's guardians until they have reached the age of 30. Youngsters are too prone to shred even good arguments to pieces, he says. Socrates then allots 5 years to the process of dialectic, and I regard this as indicating how long it would take to reach all 35 dialogues, especially since if they start studying dialectic at 30 and they spend 5 years doing it, that they are finished when they reach 35. Although nobody has interpreted the passage as I do, the two other ways that it has been interpreted are very revealing, I think. On one side are scholars who take it to mean that Plato did not teach dialectic. And indeed, one of the few facts we know is that Aristotle was 17 when he entered the academy. So in other words, he couldn't have taught dialectic because he says that dialectic is a bad thing to teach to young people, and that we know that young people came to the academy because Aristotle was 17. Therefore, Plato could not have taught dialectic in the academy. Others, I'm not making this up, others conclude that his students must have been mature men of 30 years old or more. Now, naturally, I believe neither of these. Instead, Plato discovered that the best way to teach dialectic to adolescents was not to give them beautiful, noble, uplifting, and true arguments to shred apart, but rather false, contradictory, and deceptive arguments to analyze and see through, especially arguments that negated what is truly beautiful, what is rightly just, and what is absolutely good. The second piece of evidence I use for this 5-year program is from the apocryphal but ancient Letters of Chion of Heraclea, the world's first epistolary novel. Amidst a host of other treasures, Chion tells his father that having stayed at the academy for 5 years, it had been his intent to stay there for, quote, another 5 years, close quote, but that he had decided instead to return to Heraclea to assassinate his city's newly installed tyrant, a course of action he knows will lead to his death. And incidentally, just on that point, it's commonly said that Plato was opposed to democracy. Well, Plato said all of his dialogues in the period of democracy. And one thing you got to say about democracy is it's better than tyranny. But the most interesting and compelling evidence for a 5-year curriculum are the dialogues as a whole, when reconsidered in the context of an initial Protagoras. For if Plato's neophytes saw Protagoras on opening day, and if it took more than 1 year to progress through all 35 dialogues, as really seems more than likely, all of Plato's students would see Protagoras again, and possibly see it multiple times. And given the size of its chorus and the large number of speaking parts in the dialogue, perhaps they would even take part in performing it, first as chorus members, then in speaking parts as they progressed through the curriculum. Although there are detectable allusions to all 35 of Plato's other dialogues in Protagoras, including 2 allusions that anticipate the famous critique of writing in Phaedrus that the Tübingen School so much admires, there are some dialogues that are more closely connected to it than others. And once these maximally connected dialogues are identified, they point to the culminating points of each of the Academy's 5 years. The first and most obvious case is Symposium, where the shared characters that have made the connection between the two obvious to everyone. This is frequently pointed out. But even though the connections with Laches through courage and with Gorgias, where Socrates explicitly contradicts the claim in Protagoras that the pleasant is the good, which, as I hope I've already showed, is productive of a pretty ridiculous argument in Protagoras, that even though the connections with Laches and Gorgias are strong, it is with Meno that a greater circle is closed. In addition to being the dialogue where Socrates announces that Protagoras is now dead, Meno is where Plato teaches us how we can learn virtue, not because it is knowledge, but because we can be brought to remember that we already somehow know what it is. As for republic, Aristotle based his division between Socrates and Plato on the difference between what Plato causes Socrates to say in Protagoras, where virtue is knowledge and weakness of will, akrasia, is impossible, and what Plato causes Socrates to say in Republic 4, where there are 4 virtues, not 5 of them, and all of them are different from each other, despite the arguments that Socrates gives for the unity of virtue in the Protagoras. Moreover, the tripartite soul in Republic 4 restores the possibility of akrasia, famously denied by Socrates in Protagoras. Pronounced dead in Meno, Socrates brings Protagoras back to life in Theaetetus, where for the first time, for he says nothing about it in Protagoras, at least directly, the sophist articulates his famous doctrine that man is the measure of all things. And it is only on the verge of dying himself in Phaedo that Socrates finally and conclusively rejects the notion that true virtue has anything whatsoever to do with measuring pleasures against pains. No matter what they thought the first time they saw it, every student's understanding of Protagoras has been transformed again and again and again, thanks to the new things they had learned, a clear proof that Plato has placed another bad argument in Socrates' mouth in Phaedrus when he claimed that every written text keeps saying the same thing every time you read it. In short, if Plato's students saw Protagoras again and again and saw it differently each time, the critique of writing in Phaedrus creates another of Plato's performative self-contradictions. At the end of Socrates' famous misinterpretation of the poet of Simonides in Protagoras, he calls for getting rid of the flute girls. Enough of poets and their texts, Socrates says. They aren't here to explain their meaning, so let's stop wasting our time in interpreting them. Here then is one of the funniest of Plato's many performative self-contradictions, because for more than 2,000 years, interpreting the works of an absent poet is what Plato himself has kept us busy doing. Protagoras is full of self-contradictions, as when Socrates claims to have a bad memory while recounting in detail the discussion's many twists and turns, or when he repeatedly attacks Protagoras for making lengthy speeches in his own lengthy speech that he performs for his friend. The proof that none of this is accidental is that the discussion of poetry begins with Protagoras' proof that Simonides has contradicted himself. After the sophist has gotten Socrates to agree that any poem in which the author contradicts himself cannot be rightly or beautifully made. And the verb poien here is important. In addition to the various places in the dialogue where Socrates has already contradicted himself, and the large number of fallacies he uses deliberately in the discussion of Simonides itself, one of these stands out. He makes the outrageous claim that Simonides could not possibly be saying that he is prepared to praise anyone who does nothing bad deliberately. Why? Because Socrates says that Simonides, along with all other wise men, knows that nobody makes bad things willingly. Or to put it differently, knows what no wise man out of Plato's own dialogues thinks, let alone knows that nobody makes bad things willingly. I say makes because Socrates repeatedly uses the verb poien in introducing the Socratic Paradox. And this is what makes it at once the most subtle and the most pervasive of Plato's many performative self-contradictions. A discourse that contradicts itself deliberately must be very well made indeed. The same applies even more to a long series of discourses in which one character repeatedly contradicts what they have said in another, as well as what other characters have said. Finally, in asserting that nobody errs voluntarily or makes bad things deliberately, Socrates is himself doing what he claims nobody would do. For nobody thinks it is anything but an error, and one that rests on a bad argument, to claim that Simonides embraced the Socratic paradox. As a result, we will one day see Socrates persuading the scoundrel Meno, and that he was a scoundrel we know from the pages of Xenophon's most famous book, to accept the Socratic paradox. The effect is comical. Meno resists affirming that nobody does bad things to others willingly, because that is what Xenophon has already told us that Meno prided himself on doing. Meno is finally persuaded to accept the Socratic paradox because he too would never willingly do anything that was bad for him. And by reading Meno, we are once again being prepared to see Protagoras in a new light, for we have entered the amazing world of puzzling delights created by Plato the teacher. Although it may not be possible to begin our own classes with a play or a movie perfectly adapted to confuse our students about exactly the kinds of questions we are trying to get them to think about in a serious and rigorous way, I will conclude by mentioning three of Plato's most accessible pedagogical techniques that some of you might find useful. The first, of course, is deliberate self-contradiction itself, and many is the time that I've begun my Introduction to Philosophy course by writing on the board, "There is no absolute truth," and then asking my students how many of them think that that's true, and watching the great majority of the hands go up, to which I always say, well, I guess you do need a teacher then. I guess you do. And then, I've already mentioned the preface to Don Quixote, and there are many other examples, such as the great deliberate contradiction, "There is an exception to every rule." The notion that Plato makes bad arguments deliberately and repeatedly offers us deceptive and false claims, not only through Socrates, but through his two late strangers and Timaeus, has naturally met with resistance, and it will continue to do so until the end of time. In 1962, Rosamund Kent Sprague, one of the first women to break into the upper ranks of Anglophone Plato scholars, broke new ground by arguing that Plato was fully aware of what made the arguments used by the brothers in Euthydemus fallacious. In Ascent to the Good, I built on the work of another scholar named Georgios Sirmorlo-Soumadi to extend Sprague's findings to Socrates himself in Euthydemus, where his most important speech begins with the claim that all men desire to euprotein, an equivocal phrase that Plato's students have been taught to recognize as productive of fallacy in Alcibiades Major if they haven't already detected it in Protagoras. Should I act that out? The euprotein thing about the how you doing? How you doing? In colloquial English, you ask somebody, "Hey dude, how you doing?" And the guy says, "I'm doing good." Of course, that's ungrammatical. You really should say, "I'm doing well." So, how you doing? I'm doing good. So, that when you say I'm doing good, it doesn't mean I'm a generous philanthropist that is presently giving a healthy donation to the Sierra Club and working against the re-election of Donald Trump. It doesn't mean that. It means I'm fine. I'm groovy. I'm feeling no pain. I'm good. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. It means I'm happy. I'm okay. It's exactly that way in Greek. Euprotein literally means to do good, as in to do good deeds. But colloquially, it means I'm doing good. I'm doing fine. Plato the argument in the Alcibiades Major is, okay, so running to the aid of a friend in war and incurring death or wounds, would we both agree that that is doing nobly? Yes, we would. And if it's doing nobly, wouldn't we say that it's done well? Yes. And if it's done well, that Doesn't that make you happy? See, eupratein, like if we're doing nobly, we must be eupratein, doing well. And if we're doing well, we must be happy. And if we're happy, we must have good things. And if we've got good things, then justice and dying in war is advantageous. Which, of course, it ain't. Which doesn't mean it's not noble. In defense of the claim that Plato uses deception to teach students the truth, I will cite two examples, one modern and one ancient. First, every teacher who has ever created a multiple choice exam is employing Plato's basinistic pedagogy, for it becomes our task to contrive a number of false but plausible answers to determine if the student knows enough to choose the only true one. Now, rather than build a curriculum among famous antinomies like the existence of God or not, free will or determinism or things of that kind, it would be better to think about offering our students the kind of arguments they can learn to see through. For teaching against the textbook is the second best way to open up minds. But Plato's texts are even better than a bad textbook, since his errors are both deliberate and detectable, and only a warped mind would draw from his use of deliberate deception that he is the philosopher of the noble lie. After all, the truth behind the famous Genius Pseudos of Republic 3 is that, 1, a caste system based on the existence of metals in the soul, and 2, a chauvinistic nationalism based on Blut und Boden are precisely lies. As for the ancient evidence, I've already mentioned Rora Perea and the very, very great man Parmenides, but this noble pre-Socratic now exists only in fragments. Better, then, is the older Homeric question of whether Odysseus or Achilles is the better man. About this, I will say that if my remarks here on Plato's use of deliberate deception have made any of you think that Socrates' argument for the superiority of Odysseus in Hippias Minor is anything other than deliberately fallacious, then I have failed to make myself clear. We return to the cave, just as Achilles stays in Troy, or Socrates stayed in jail. But we can turn the tricks of Odysseus towards the good of others, and that is something that the son of Laertius never did. Finally, there is the hardest but best lesson of all. In teaching philosophy, we must learn to entertain while we instruct. And the more we are serious about conveying serious lessons to our students in an entertaining way, the more we will come to rely on Plato and those like Cicero, Cervantes, and Kierkegaard who have followed the path of Platonic pedagogy. Whether or not my 5-year image of the old academy, punctuated by annual productions of Protagoras, is anything more than a pipe dream, there is something to be learned from thinking about how instructive such a school would be. I like to imagine the youngster who memorized the speech of Agathon while studying Symposium at the end of his first year, now getting the chance to enact him in Protagoras at the beginning of the second. Like young Hippocrates, he will be learning how to become a clever speaker, but he will have learned so much more as well. Even if the question uppermost in his mind while reading Hippias Major and Hippias Minor had been, is Socrates having sex with Alcibiades? The revelation that he isn't would have made the nature of what we still call Platonic love obvious to him, and it wouldn't be long before, having ascended next to the idea of the good, he found himself ready not only for a speaking part in next year's play, but more importantly, for finding a way to speak for the good of others in the cave after leaving the academy, just as Lycurgus, Phocion, Hyperides, and possibly even Demosthenes did. But regardless of the details, it will always be the eternal academy, created by his immortal dialogues, that we enter every time we begin reading or teaching any one of them. And it should be with a deep sense of gratitude that combines delight with awe in equal measures that we enter the shrine of the Muses, where Plato will continue to teach as long as there are schools. Thank you very much. We tried a different experiment at the University of Valencia, and I hope that you guys won't let them be better than you. What we did there was that I began by opening the floor up to questions even before the talk. And although that got off to a pretty slow start, it ended up being, yeah, we got to get our translator here. Do you have a chair? Okay. It's just nicer, it's nicer to see you. Maybe I'll come over, maybe, oh, well, I don't know. Anyway, we opened the floor up to questions first, and then I read the paper, and then we had more questions, and that seems to have worked pretty well, but we had a nice dinner, and it was pretty energetic, and I was a little tired, so I thought I'd better just read the paper read the paper and get it over with. But don't make me feel foolish for doing that. Please, could we have a question, or would you like me to say some provocative things that might force you to raise a question? Please, just help me out. Any questions?
Y aquí es donde entro yo intentando traducir. Comenta que o bien lanzamos preguntas o él se va a poner en plan provocativo para intentar arrancároslas. Y yo intentaré traducírselas a él y de vuelta, y me perdonáis por lo que voy a hacer.
Well, go ahead.
Existe también el Don Juan de Lord Byron. ¿Y qué relación tiene este con el mito del movimiento? ¿El mismo que el Don Juan español?
I don't know. Like I said, I didn't understand what Rora Perea said then, and I don't really understand what he meant now. The only thing I can get out of the myth of movement is that he just went from one woman to the other and never really wanted to stay in one place and just treated each moment as a moment in time, like that there was no future for him and there was no past. He just lived in the moment and did whatever seemed to be pleasant to him at the time. And he was capable of saying beautiful things to women because that was the person to whom he was talking. And he just said the most beautiful things he could say to whoever he happened to be with. So he had no principles, he had no future, he had no past, he had no morals, he had no scruples. He was just a perpetual motion machine.
La respuesta es no. Él dice que nunca entendió lo que dijo el maestro, pero cree que lo único que tenía que ver el mito del movimiento es que Don Juan pasa de una mujer a la siguiente sin ningún tipo de escrúpulos ni de sentimientos profundos por ella, y que por tanto, y por algún lugar, me he quedado.
Okay.
Es solo... ¿Se oye? Es solo una curiosidad. Yo no conocía a Roura Parella, tu profesor Will, pero no, estos 4 mitos no son de Carl Smith.
I don't know. I know that Rora Perea studied in Berlin in the 30s, and the one he talked about the most was Spranger. You can look up Rora Perea. He's in the, he's a known person. His field seems to have been pedagogia. I certainly don't ever remember him talking about Schmidt, but then I had not heard of Carl Schmidt, I'm glad to say, at that time.
La respuesta es no. Comenta que Pereya sí que había estudiado en Berlín anteriormente y que por tanto seguramente sí que conocía a Schmidt, pero no tiene constancia de que así sea.
Pero esa no era la pregunta. Era una curiosidad. La mención final a Ulises, Odiseus y Aquiles.
Mm-hmm.
Hay una página muy hermosa de Whitehead donde contrapone a Platón y a Ulises. Pero si he entendido bien, aquí quien es el capítulo final de Plato de Teacher, Odysseus o Aquiles. Debemos preferir a Aquiles porque se queda en Troya.
Well, so, I mean, first of all, Rick, this is kind of grist for your mill, because the way Homer keeps coming back is one of the most interesting things in Plato. And I could certainly recommend, as a topic, the question of whether Plato prefers Achilles to Odysseus. Why don't you translate that?
Homero vuelve una y otra vez en los diálogos de Platón, y una de las partes que más le interesa es cómo habla sobre esa preferencia entre Aquiles y Odiseo.
In the Protagoras, he invites you to think that he likes Odysseus more.
En el Protagoras te hace pensar que le gusta más Odiseo.
He enters the garden of Callias and starts acting like he's Odysseus.
Entra en el jardín de Calias y empieza a actuar como si fuera Odiseo.
I entered the underworld and there I spied Tantalus.
Fui al submundo y espié a Tántalo.
But Plato is a genius.
Pero Platón es un genio.
And so from the very beginning, it's not that clear.
Y desde el principio, Platón es un genio y desde el principio no está tan claro.
The first question that Socrates asks in the Protagoras is,
La primera pregunta que hace Sócrates en el Protagoras es:
you're an admirer of Homer, aren't you?
Eres un admirador de Homero, ¿verdad?
Which I take to mean not that you had to be geometrical to enter Plato's academy,
Lo cual implica que no has de ser geómetra para entrar en la Academia de Platón,
but that you needed to know your Homer.
pero que deberías saber bien a Homero.
Because if Plato banished Homer from his city,
Porque si Homero prohíbe
he sure
si
didn't banish
Platón
him from his dialogues.
a Homero de la ciudad, desde luego no lo hacen sus
And
diálogos.
you've got this homoerotic quotation from Homer,
Y tienes esta cita homoerótica de Homero,
because the line that he quotes from Homer
porque la línea que cita Platón
is that a young man is most sexually attractive when the beard is growing from his chin from the first time,
es que un hombre es más sexualmente atractivo cuando la barba crece de su
and that most people that interpret that line think that it's a reference to the Odyssey, where it is used,
Y la mayor parte de la gente que lee esa cita piensa que está referida a Odiseo.
but it is one of about 55 lines in Homer that appears identically in both epics.
Pero es una de las 55 líneas que aparecen exactamente igual en sus dos poemas épicos.
And when that line
De Homero.
appears in the Iliad,
Y cuando aparece en la Ilíada,
it's in the 24th book of the Iliad, when the voice of the gods tell Priam to go to the tent of Achilles to retrieve the dead body of his son.
es en el 24º libro cuando los dioses le dicen a Príamo que vaya a la tienda a recuperar el cuerpo de su hijo, a la tienda de Aquiles.
And to make sure he gets safe passage in there, the god Hermes turns himself into this sexually attractive boy with the beard just coming.
Y para asegurarse de que tiene un pasaje seguro hasta allí, el dios Hermes se convierte en ese joven atractivo.
But before he leaves, his wife, Hecuba, gives him a piece of her mind.
Pero antes de dejar a su mujer,
What's the matter with you, old man?
le dice ¿qué pasa contigo?
Have you lost
viejo?
your wits?
¿Has perdido tu intelecto?
Have the gods turned your mind to stone?
¿Han convertido los dioses tu mente en piedra?
Is Achilles known for his mercy?
¿Es Aquiles conocido por su...
You think you're going to get a warm reception in the tent of the man that murdered our son?
Te van a dar una paliza.
When Hermes arrives at the tent of Achilles and Priam goes into the tent, Achilles looks at him and says, "Have you lost your wits, old man? Have the gods turned your thoughts to stone? Is Achilles known for his mercy?" In other words, Achilles says the exact same words that Hecuba said to her husband.
Cuando llegan a la tienda de Aquiles repite las mismas palabras que la mujer le había dicho justo antes. ¿Estás tonto? ¿Te crees que Aquiles es conocido porque tenga piedad de los demás?
So if we thought about that quotation from Homer a little bit more deeply, even at the start,
Si pensamos en esa cita que Platón hace de Homero al principio,
we might spare ourselves a lot of difficulty.
Nos ahorraríamos muchas dificultades.
But Plato wants it to be difficult.
Pero Platón quiere que sea difícil.
And in the Lesser Hippias, after raising the question of whether Achilles or Odysseus is the nobler man,
Y en Hipias Menor, cuando se hace esa pregunta de cuál de los dos es el mejor,
Socrates gives a very, very strong impression that he regards Odysseus as the better man.
Sócrates da la impresión de pensar que Odiseo es el mejor.
Of course, he uses a deliberately false argument to do it.
Y utiliza deliberadamente un argumento falso.
And anybody that goes back and reads the texts that are being discussed will see that.
Y cualquiera que lea el texto que se está discutiendo se da cuenta.
But those who don't won't.
Pero aquellos que no lo saben,
And then in the Republic, after getting rid of the line, I would rather be the slave of a poor man,
y después en la República, después de esa frase, preferiría ser el esclavo de un hombre pobre
than be the lord of all of the dead souls in the kingdom of Hades,
que ser el rey de todas las almas muertas en el reino de
which
Hades.
Socrates says we should get rid of because it will make our guardians scared to die.
Sorry, come again.
Which Socrates says we should get rid of because it will make our guardians afraid to die.
Del cual deberíamos librarnos, dice Sócrates, porque si no asustaría a nuestros guardianes.
That same line that he's just gotten rid of in Book 2
Esa misma línea de la que se van a librar en el segundo libro
reappears when the fatal decision of the Republic is reached.
reaparece cuando la decisión fatal de la República llega,
When the question comes whether the philosopher will return to the cave.
sobre si el filósofo volverá o no a la caverna.
Or would he rather, as Achilles says, rather be the slave of a poor man than reign over all of the dead in the kingdom of Hades?
Y ahí utiliza otra vez la frase de si preferirían ser los esclavos de un hombre pobre o ser los reyes de las almas muertas en el Hades.
And the problem with that is that those lines don't appear in the Iliad.
Y el problema está en que esas líneas no aparecen en la Ilíada.
And Achilles is already dead at the beginning of the Odyssey.
Y Aquiles ya está muerto al principio de la Odisea.
Rather, it is Odysseus who says that Achilles says that.
En realidad es Odiseo el que las dice.
Now, if you believe that Odysseus actually did travel into the underworld,
Si de verdad pensáis que Odiseo viajó al submundo,
visited the dead,
visitó a los muertos,
fought against the Cyclopes,
luchó contra los cíclopes,
who, by the way, were the mortal enemies of the Phaeacians from whom he's trying to get a boat at just that moment.
que por cierto eran los enemigos mortales de
If
los
you
cielos,
believe all
que
that-
había un barco. Si queréis todo eso,
I have a deed here to a bridge in Brooklyn that I'd like to sell you.
tengo aquí las obligaciones de un puerta en Brooklyn que os puede vender.
That's standard American English for, like, that's a lie.
Vamos, que es mentira.
Okay, so that if you realize that Achilles is being falsely cited to prevent somebody from entering the cave,
Aquiles ha sido falsamente o erróneamente citado para evitar que alguien entre en la caverna.
that becomes the turning point in the relationship between Odysseus and Achilles in the Platonic dialogues,
Y ese es el momento en que cambia la relación entre Odiseo y Aquiles.
especially given what happens in Book 10, where the Odysseus figure chooses the life of the guy that minds his own business and would never do anything so foolish as go back down into the cave.
Especialmente en el libro 10, en el que Odiseo parece elegir la vida de aquel que se ocupa de sus asuntos y nunca entraría de nuevo en la...
Once we get past the Republic, it becomes smooth sailing. Once we get past the Republic, it becomes clearer. The truth becomes clearer.
Una vez acabamos con la República, la verdad aparece más clara.
When Socrates stands alone in front of the jury,
Cuando Sócrates está a solas frente al...
he makes clear
jurado,
that Achilles is his hero, and that he is staying in Athens just the way Achilles stayed in Troy.
aclara que Aquiles era su héroe y que él se quedará en Atenas como Aquiles se quedó en Troya.
And when Crito tells him he will die tomorrow,
Y cuando le dicen que morirá el día siguiente,
he says, I don't think I will,
él dice no creo que lo haga,
because I had a dream last night
porque tuve un sueño la última noche
that said on the third day I will return to fruitful Phthia,
que dice que al tercer día volveré a...
just as Achilles had done.
como Aquiles hizo.
I have a question. Oh, good. We got one there. Good, because I'm ready. Like if you leave any gaps here, I'm gonna ask some questions. We got one back there.
A ver si puedo plantearla bien y de manera simple. Pues lo último que estaba comentando es que aparece la imitación o la copia. ¿Hace falta que el que sale de la caverna realmente vuelva para ayudar a los que están dentro? ¿O ya deja un rastro de las ascuas del mismo fuego? O si podemos entenderlo como antorchas o como espejos que reflejan esa misma luz pero hacia afuera. Cuando Platón hace la metáfora, la primera parte o la parte interior está muy bien detallada, pero la gruta que te lleva afuera no está absolutamente detallada. ¿Es siempre oscura al que intenta salir, o tenemos ya, después de toda la historia de la filosofía, o de la filosofía ya no tanto como método, sino como contenido, una serie de indicaciones que nos dejan o nos ayudan a salir de la caverna?
Well, I mean, yes to both. Yeah, it's definitely necessary for us to go back.
Sí, a las dos cosas. Hay que volver,
But it's also possible for us to get ourselves out.
pero también es posible salir nosotros mismos,
Especially when we have the help of Plato.
especialmente con la ayuda de Platón.
As Plato says to us directly,
Como Platón nos dice directamente,
you've had a better education than all the rest.
vosotros habéis tenido una mejor educación que el resto.
How do we know that?
¿Cómo lo sabemos?
Because you're reading book 7 of My Republic.
Porque estás leyendo el 7º libro de mi República.
After all, we all know that. Like, there's not a philosophy professor in the world that's worthy of the name that doesn't teach the allegory of the cave.
Al fin y al cabo todos lo sabemos, no hay ningún profesor de filosofía que se precie a serlo que no enseñe la alegoría de la caverna.
And if Xenophon had not been the first great Greek philosopher whose writings survive complete,
Y si Xenofonte no hubiera sido el primer gran filósofo griego del que sobrevivió toda su obra,
and if Plato had not been the second great Greek philosopher to survive complete,
y si Platón no hubiera sido el segundo,
if Plato survived as a pre-Socratic,
si Platón no hubiera sobrevivido como un
all we'd have
presocrático,
of him is the allegory of the cave.
todo lo que nos quedaría sería la alegoría de la caverna.
And don't think that Plato didn't know it either.
No penséis que
He
Platón
knew
no lo
that that
sabía
was the
también.
most important thing that he wrote,
Él sabía que era lo más importante que había
and
escrito.
that's why we've been talking about it ever
Y
since.
por eso es por lo que hemos
And we'll be
estado
talking
hablando
about
de
it
eso
forever.
entonces, y estaremos hablando de ello para siempre.
It is the core around which his thought pivots.
Es el centro alrededor de lo cual todo pivota.
The material world is a world of illusion,
El mundo material es un mundo de ilusión,
but excellence and nobility of character are real.
pero la excelencia y la nobleza de carácter son reales.
And the person that only serves themselves
Y las personas que solo se sirven a sí mismos
is... What word should I use there? I would tempted to use asshole. What should it...
idiotas.
An idiotus. Okay, good. That's more neutral. And the person that serves only themselves is an idiot.
I used gilipollas, but
Oh, okay.
in case you want to improve your
Yeah.
your dodgy Spanish.
Yeah. Get a few good words in Spanish in
Yeah.
there. So that's a great, I guess that's a great question. You can't talk about getting out of the cave or going back down into the cave without Plato, right? You're talking about Plato's language as soon as we ask the question.
No se puede hablar de salir de la caverna, volver a ella, si no estás utilizando el vocabulario de Platón, por tanto. Estamos en
I'm intrigued by what you said about having a torch.
Está intrigado sobre lo de la antorcha.
What did you mean by that?
¿A qué te referías?
Para los primeros filósofos o las primeras personas que salieron, la caverna estaría a oscuras. Sería algo que lo pone, que tiene que ser un camino tortuoso, difícil, que uno tiene que sacrificarse para conseguirlo, pero poco a poco esa gruta o esa cueva va siendo conocida por el resto. Tiene que ser más fácil salir, o cada gruta de cada uno es independiente.
For the first who left the cave, this way out should be very dark, very difficult. But he asks if nowadays this passage is better known, or for each one of us is always the same dark and difficult passage.
Well, imagine...
Sorry. Es para seguir con la metáfora, para utilizar algún elemento que sea metafórico. Para utilizar otro elemento que sea metafórico, podría ser también lo que había dicho de los espejos, que esa gruta se pase de ser algo oscuro a ser algo claro, ya sea la luz, la de fuera, o esa luz interna que se representa con la fogata.
So it's the idea that maybe to carry on with the simile. If like nowadays these passages.
I think I've got an idea how I want to reply. Well, imagine, for example, just for the sake of argument, that there were a young student who decided that they wanted to be a teacher of philosophy in the schools of Spain.
Imaginemos por un momento que hay un joven estudiante que decide que quiere ser profesor de filosofía.
And let's say they were a reasonably intelligent person.
Y pensemos que es razonablemente inteligente.
And their father thought they should become a lawyer.
Y su padre dice que debería ser un abogado, una
And their
abogada.
mother thought they should become a doctor.
Y su madre que debía ser un doctor o una doctora.
But they really wanted to go and teach philosophy in the school.
Pero quiere ser profesor en el colegio.
They really liked philosophy and they wanted to share it with others.
Le encanta la filosofía y quiere compartirla con otros.
They didn't know anything about labor unions.
No sabe nada sobre los
They didn't know anything
sindicatos,
about department heads.
sobre profesores,
They
directores de
didn't,
departamento.
they didn't know anything about pensions.
No sabe nada de pensiones.
They didn't know anything about weekly, tiring meetings chaired by boring idiots.
No sabe nada de reuniones semanales dirigidas por
It never
idiotas.
occurred to them that some administrator who hadn't been in a classroom for 20 years would act like they were a good teacher,
Jamás se le ocurriría que un administrador que no está en una clase durante 20
or that they would
años
be
ahora se
told to
creen que son
adapt,
buenos profesores.
or that they would be told to adapt their curriculum to some abstract idea invented by a professor of education who knew nothing about the subject.
O que tendría que adaptar su currículum a las ideas de algún petardo que no tiene ni idea de lo que está diciendo.
They would know nothing of any of that,
No saben nada sobre eso.
equipped only with their idealism and their desire to teach.
Continúan con su idealismo y con su deseo de
They would
enseñar.
enter into a hornet's nest,
Entrarían en el nido de unos abejorros,
where long-term teachers who were used maybe to being good 20 years ago
donde viejos profesores que solían ser buenos hace 20 años
would envy the very obvious affection that the students were giving to this new and idealistic teacher,
tendrían envidia al afecto que los estudiantes harían a ese
doing
nuevo
everything they could
idealista
to,
profesor,
doing everything they could to undermine her or him,
haciendo todo lo que pudieran para
gossiping
minar
about
a ese
her,
nuevo profesor,
giving them
chismeando
crummy
sobre él,
classes,
dándole
bad classrooms.
porquería de clases y malas
I
habitaciones.
think it's the same.
Es lo mismo.
I remember an anecdote of Georg Lukács when he was arrested by the KGB. Sorry. And Lukács was an enemy of Kafka
Yeah.
because he thought that he's not a realist. When he was in the furgon, in the wagon, in the middle of the night, Lukács said, "Ja, Kafka war ein Realist." So, your description of a young professor of philosophy is realist. That's the point.
Is that way to me?
To which idiom?
Yeah. Antonio Lastra, muy amablemente.
Creo que mi idioma inglés
Sí.
es lo suficientemente malo como para que todos lo hayan
Sí,
entendido.
sí, ¿no? Bien, habéis pillado el tema de Lukács y Kafka.
Hola, sí, se oye. Bien, yo quería un poquito que me explicaras. Al enseñar filosofía debemos aprender a entretener mientras instruimos.
no.
Entretener, para
Un
mí,
momento.
Ya. Me dice que si quieres me vayas haciendo la pregunta que ahora se la cuento yo.
Vale, claro que sí. Así va a ser. Bueno, pues entretener sí tiene, para mí, tiene mucho que ver con las emociones, con los sentimientos y no con la razón. ¿Vale? Entonces hay que implicarse en el entretenimiento a nivel emocional, sentimental, no sé, desde la afectividad, para que los alumnos aprendan.
Ahora de repente me da la sensación de que me lo estás preguntando a mí. Buah, me siento súper importante. No, ahora. Vale. Se ha quedado buena tarde. She was asking if in teaching you should go by this Deutsche Dilettando, if you should involve yourself in something apart than rational thinking, but also emotional make them enjoy and so on? To what extent teaching should imply this?
Well, you know, I think you can see my answer. I think showing emotion in the classroom and demonstrating excitement and love and enthusiasm for what you teach is a good thing.
Dice que seguramente habrás visto en él mismo la respuesta, que emocionarse en las clases y enseñar entusiasmo y pasión por lo que enseñas es una cosa buena.
The first time I liked studying mathematics
La primera vez que le cogió el gustillo a estudiar matemáticas
was when my geometry teacher
fue cuando su profesor de geometría
revealed that he was crying
reveló que estaba llorando
after putting the Pythagorean theorem up on the board.
después de poner el teorema de Pitágoras sobre la pizarra.
He turned to the class and said, "Isn't that beautiful?"
Se giró a la clase y dijo, ¿no es maravilloso?
I used to, when I was teaching Thucydides, I would challenge the students to pick a passage.
Cuando enseñaba Tucídides, retaba a los estudiantes a elegir un pasaje.
And I would say, if any of you can read a passage from Thucydides
Si alguno puede leer un pasaje de Tucídides
and cry,
y llorar,
I'll give you an A and you can skip the next quiz.
te pondré un 10 y no hace falta que hagas el próximo examen.
And some of them tried.
Y algunos lo intentaron.
And they would usually pick the very sad and pathetic passages about how the Athenians ended up in the quarries.
Y normalmente cogían los pasajes más terribles y más tristes de cómo los atenienses acabaron como Rosario de la Aurora.
And as a result, they really didn't get very good at crying.
Y por tanto no acababan llorando demasiado.
The really tear-jerking passage in Thucydides
El pasaje que de verdad te lleva a las lágrimas en
is
Tucídides
long before they're in the quarries.
es mucho antes de que empiecen las batallas.
But when the ships take sail from Athens,
Sino es cuando los barcos se alejan de Atenas
and filled with hope and certain of glory,
y llenos de esperanza y certeza de gloria,
they race all the way to Aegina.
van hasta donde tienen que ir.
And I would read that passage to them.
Y leía ese pasaje a ellos
And I would do what I'm doing now.
y hacía lo que está haciendo ahora.
I never found a student that was turned off by my tears,
Nunca encontré un estudiante que se sintiera mal por sus lágrimas.
much to the contrary.
Más bien al contrario.
Hey, this is going to be in English, dude. No, that's cool. I'd like to hear your question.
It's about the thing you said in the morning about the balanced philosopher that wouldn't go
About
into
the what?
cave. Balanced philosopher. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He said he wouldn't go into the cave again. I don't understand this.
I don't think I said that.
I think he did, or that's what I
Yeah, you must have missed that.
probably.
I'm big on
misunderstand.
going back down to the cave, dude. No reason not to.
No,
No, and the balance, no. No, I would never say that.
you would always go into the cave again.
Yeah.
Oh, I probably misunderstood it then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, the time to get out of the cave is when you're dead. You know, if you go back down during your life, you'll be happy to die. Because you will suffer a lot of crap down there.
Yeah.
At least I did.
El compañero preguntaba sobre algo de esta mañana, que no acaba de ser exactamente como decía, pero aprovecha para comentar que el momento en el que un filósofo que tiene equilibrio en su alma decide salir de nuevo, por segunda vez, de la caverna es cuando muere. Y evidentemente, antes de morir, sufrirá mucho por lo que tiene que hacer.
More? We haven't talked that much about any specific dialogues. Do any of you have a favorite dialogue?
¿Tienes diálogos? ¿Quieres? I think he wants to...
Oh, you're going to go more?
Yeah, I have another question.
Oh, great. Far out.
It's about, you say, about, well, I'm going to get another one, really. Teach against the book.
Oh, yeah.
That's like challenge the student. That's how I get it.
The way I look at it more, well, you might want to translate.
Pregunta eso de enseñar en contra del libro. El compañero considera que es retar al estudiante.
The way I look at it, certainly the way I taught, is that basically I viewed my classes as a conspiracy.
La forma en que lo ve y como él estudia, como él enseña, es pensar que las clases son una especie como de conspiración.
And that the conspirators were the students and me.
Y que los conspiradores son los estudiantes y él.
And that we were basically trying to see our way through the illusions.
Y que estaban intentando escaparse de las ilusiones
with which we were surrounded.
que le rodeaban.
And so I remember that early in my career,
Recuerda que al principio de su carrera,
my colleagues decided that although a smart man,
sus colegas decidieron que incluso que a pesar de ser un tipo listo,
that I would only be able to teach smart kids.
que solamente sería capaz de enseñar a tipos listos.
So they hit on the very brilliant idea
Así que llegaron a la brillante conclusión
of giving me the slowest students in the school,
de dar de los estudiantes más tontos del
and
colegio
those that had special plans for learning disabilities,
y aquellos que tenían planes especiales para dificultades,
the blind,
los ciegos,
the Ritalin swallowers.
los que tragan raro.
Once when they gave me a class of these, I had 13 of these students in my class.
En una de sus clases tenía 13
And the first thing I said to them was, you guys all know why you're here, right?
y lo que le dijo fue, chavales, sabéis por qué estáis aquí, ¿verdad?
Do you think there should be classes like this one in here where all the people have put you in here because they don't think they're not putting you in the regular classes because they think you need a special one? Like, do you think there should really be classes like this?
¿Pensáis que debería haber clases como estas en las que ponen a la gente que no quieren en otras clases?
I had 13 students in the class.
Tenía 13 estudiantes en la clase.
6 of them said, yes, I find it difficult to learn and it's good for me to have it go a little slower and I think I need a class like this.
6 dijeron que sí, que tenían dificultades en aprender y que pensaban que una clase sí les ayudaría.
And 6 of them said, hell no.
Y 6 dijeron, ni de coña.
I am tired of being in class with the same people and being looked at like a dummy all the time.
Estoy cansado de estar siempre con los mismos y
I
parecer
hate
un
these
idiota.
classes. They make me feel stupid.
Odio estas clases.
And
me hacen
everybody
sentir
looks
estúpido.
down on me.
Y todo el mundo me mira con condescendencia.
And one student, the 13th,
Y un estudiante, el 13º,
he said, yes, there should be classes like this.
sí, debería haber clases así.
Because I've been in upper level and regular classes myself.
Porque he estado en las otras clases,
And in classes with a lot of smart kids,
en clases con muchos chavales listos.
teachers tell you to read chapter 6,
Los profesores te dicen, lee el capítulo 6
and then you give a quiz on it.
y te hacen un test.
At least in these classes, you guys still have to teach.
Al menos aquí tú todavía tienes que enseñar.
So I think we should have classes like this just so some of you remember how to teach,
Así que deberíamos tener clases como esta para que algunos de vosotros os acordéis de cómo enseñar.
which I thought was an excellent answer.
Lo que pienso que era una respuesta brillante.
And so what I would do in those classes, I would say, look, what they say you guys can't do is you're incapable of abstract thinking. That's the rap on you guys.
Lo que dicen que no sois capaces de hacer es el pensamiento abstracto.
That
Eso
we
es con lo
should
que
keep everything hands-on.
que deberíamos mantenerlo todo sencillito.
And I should give you blocks to play with.
Te debería dar bloques de madera para jugar.
Let's prove them wrong.
Vamos a demostrar que se equivocan.
2.
Hola, hemos escuchado, bueno, yo he leído aquí que Platón introduce en sus textos errores deliberados, el filósofo de la noble mentira, y en particular que en República 3 la idea de un sistema de castas basado en los metales del alma es una mentira. Y a partir de esta mentira, mi pregunta es, a partir de esta mentira, ¿dónde quiere ir a parar Platón?
He says that you said that he introduces novel line, including this idea of the 3 different castes, and she says, well, where he trying to go through this novel line of the 3 castes?
What was he trying to what?
Where is he going with this line?
You asked a similar question this morning.
Dice que has preguntado algo parecido esta mañana.
Sí, parecido, claro, sí. Y ahora que ya me queda claro que es una mentira deliberada y me satisface y me pregunto, ¿y dónde quiere ir a parar con esto?
So it's the shortcut.
Es el atajo.
that the isomorphism
que el isomorfismo
between the soul and its three parts and the city and its three classes
entre las tres partes del alma y las tres clases de la
is the
ciudad
basis on which he's going to derive a phony definition of justice.
son las bases sobre las que va a derivar una falsa definición de justicia.
And I call it a phony division of
Y
justice
la llama una
Phony
falsa
definition.
definición de justicia.
because it's not the kind of justice that would cause anybody to do a great and noble action for the benefit of others.
Porque no es la definición que llevaría a la gente a hacer nobles causas en beneficio de los
In
demás.
1963,
En 1963,
a scholar by the name of David Sachs
un profesor llamado David Sachs
wrote a very influential article
escribió un artículo muy influente
saying that Plato's Republic was a very deeply flawed work.
diciendo que la República de Platón era una obra echada a perder.
Because the so-called just man of Book 4
Porque el así llamado hombre justo del libro cuarto
not only would not do anything overtly just,
no solamente no haría nada evidentemente justo,
but not even refrain from doing things that were unjust.
pero ni siquiera se refrenaría de hacer cosas injustas.
This caused an avalanche of response,
Esto causa una avalancha de respuestas
and dozens of scholars jumped in to try to refute him.
y docenas de profesores se apresuraron a refutarlo.
And what's different about my way of reading Plato from most people
Y lo que hace diferente su forma de leer a Platón de la del resto
is that I like David Lax.
es que a él le gusta David Lacks.
He was pointing out that the arguments that lead to Book 4 don't really get you very far.
Él señaló que los argumentos en el libro cuarto no te llevan muy lejos.
The difference is that David Sachs thought that meant that Plato didn't know what he was doing.
La diferencia está en que aquel David Lacks pensó que Platón no tenía ni idea de lo que estaba haciendo,
Whereas my claim is that the definition of justice isn't given in Book 4,
mientras que él considera que la definición de justicia no se da en el libro
but rather
cuarto,
that Plato makes you find it in Book 7.
sino que Platón te hace encontrarla en el libro séptimo.
And my evidence is that he refers to the shorter way in Book 4.
Y su evidencia es que él se refiere a ese atajo en el libro cuarto.
And he refers to that longer way again in Book 6.
Y se refiere al camino más largo en el libro sexto.
But he never says what the definition is.
Pero nunca dice cuál es la definición.
He says it involves the idea of the good,
Él dice que envuelve la idea de bien,
but he doesn't say what it is.
pero no dice lo que es.
And that's because the student has to figure out what it is.
Y es porque el estudiante debe llegar a saber lo que es por sí
And,
mismo.
and in the allegory of the cave,
Y en la alegoría de la caverna,
he challenges you to realize that although they're forced to go back down into the cave in the city,
te reta a que te des cuenta de que aunque hay fuerzas contra lo que estás haciendo,
that anybody that has the alma to be a school teacher,
cualquiera que tenga el alma para ser
or the courage
profesor,
to be a firefighter,
o el coraje de ser un bombero,
or the humanity to be a nurse,
o la humanidad de ser un enfermero,
will know that the good person doesn't just simply benefit themselves,
sabe que la buena persona no solamente se
but voluntarily
hará bien
takes
para
on
sí,
suffering for the benefit of others.
sino que tomará sufrimiento voluntario en el beneficio de los demás.
A simple proposition
Una simple proposición
that every person on earth that hasn't been corrupted by a sophist
que cualquier persona sobre la tierra que no ha sido corrompida por un sofista
knows is the noble, right, and good, and in fact just simply the decent thing to do.
sabe distinguir entre el bien y el mal, o de hecho la cosa decente que hacer.
Now, what Plato actually does is that he has Socrates say the following statement.
Lo que Platón hace es hacer que Sócrates diga el siguiente.
In Book 1 of the Republic,
En el libro 1 de la República,
in discussing a city that had only good people in it,
discutiendo una ciudad,
he says that nobody would want to rule in that city
dice que nadie querría ser gobernante en esa ciudad,
because every man of sense,
porque todo ser humano, toda persona con sentido común,
pas ho gignoskon, that every man of sense would prefer to be benefited than to take the trouble of benefiting others.
toda persona con sentido común preferiría ser beneficiado que beneficiar a los demás.
And if when confronted by that statement, your response is, oh, Plato says better to be benefited by others than be benefited than to benefit others taking trouble. Okay, got it. If that's what they do, they're never going to understand Plato.
Y si lo que haces después de leer eso es pensar que es lo que dice Platón, que es mejor ocuparte de ti o que los demás te ayuden, que tú ayudes a los demás, no has pillado nada.
What they have to say is, my dad's a fireman, Mr. Altman.
Lo que deben decir es, mi padre es un bombero, señor Altman.
He takes a lot of trouble benefiting others.
Se arriesga mucho intentando beneficiar a los demás.
And my mother gave birth to me.
Y mi madre me dio a luz a mí.
And she was in labor for 14 hours.
Y estuvo en lo que hay antes de dar a luz.
And she's
durante
told me many
14
times
horas.
that wasn't very pleasant for her.
Y me dijo que no fue demasiado agradable.
And yet she seemed very happy that I was born.
Y parecía muy contenta de que yo
And it's
hubiera
been
nacido.
very nice to me for a long number of years.
Y ha sido muy buena conmigo durante mucho tiempo.
And even you, Mr. Altman,
E incluso usted, señor Altman.
you don't seem to get that. You don't seem to be making a lot of money as a teacher.
No parece que gane mucha pasta siendo profesor.
And yet you seem to be benefiting me.
Y sin embargo parece que me está ayudando.
So I think your Plato is wrong.
Así que creo que Platón se equivoca.
I don't think it's clear that every good man would rather be benefited.
No creo que esté claro que todo hombre bueno
I think some
preferiría ser
people must
beneficiado.
rather benefit than
Creo que
benefit
algunos
others.
preferiría beneficiar a otros.
And then you say, Jose,
Y entonces dirías, José,
I love you.
te quiero.
Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. Maybe you don't say that in public, though. You don't want to give it away.
Quizá no lo digas en público.
You might just say, Jose.
En español, que va a ser un poco
Please.
más largo. La dificultad está en mi vieja afición a Leo Strauss. Vamos a ver. Tanto esta mañana como esta tarde, como en las largas discusiones de ayer. Sí. Está claro que al menos podemos decir que la democracia es mejor que la tiranía. Pero ni siquiera bajo la presidencia de Donald Trump, ni en España, estaríamos en condiciones de decir que nos encontramos en una tiranía. Quiero decir que no solamente a personajes estrambóticos como Puigdemont se le ocurriría decir algo así. ¿Eso qué quiere decir? Que si no nos encontramos, porque este es el punto de Leo Strauss, y yo creo que donde tenemos todavía cierta dificultad en entender realmente el problema de la alegoría de la caverna de Platón y el hecho de que exista, el hecho de que la caverna siga siendo una alegoría incluso cuando el régimen político, el régimen de la ciudad, no es una tiranía. Porque si es una tiranía, parece que la caverna es comprensible, pero es comprensible, haré un inciso, muchos amigos míos consideran que yo soy algo así como un protofascista, porque sigo creyendo en la existencia de la caverna. Me hacen ver que creer que la caverna existe es poco más o menos que no darme cuenta de los beneficios de la tiranía, de la democracia, perdón, y que por tanto si mantengo la caverna es porque en el fondo creo que el filósofo es un ser superior que mantiene un sistema de castas y que por tanto eso es una forma de protofascismo intelectual. Fin del paréntesis. ¿Qué vigencia tiene?
Let's just stop for a minute. Let's get that part. Oh, I see. That's a really great question.
No, eso es lo que le diría que no.
Okay, go on.
Entonces, con Strauss no tengo esta dificultad, porque naturalmente Strauss era un amigo, yo traduciría condicional de la democracia liberal, no cualificado, sino condicional. Me parece que este era un matiz de la traducción que era importante esta mañana, pero quizá no me equivoco demasiado al rectificarlo, ¿no? Por tanto, Strauss era un amigo condicional de la democracia liberal, lo cual significaba que en el fondo no creía demasiado en la democracia liberal. Vamos a suponer que yo no soy tan straussiano como para ser solo un amigo condicional de la democracia, sino que soy sinceramente un partidario de la democracia. Vamos a suponerlo.
I understood all that.
Then, la pregunta es, ¿tiene sentido seguir manteniendo la alegoría como creo sinceramente, puesto que creo más en la caverna que en la democracia? Es decir, creo que la caverna existe y dudo de que la democracia exista.
Uh-huh.
Pero si damos por supuesto que efectivamente incluso la América de Donald Trump e incluso los peores momentos de una democracia representativa como la nuestra no son la tiranía. Si estamos en situaciones de no tiranía, ¿tiene sentido, William, mantener nuestra voluntad de entender lo que significa la alegoría de la caverna, que no por casualidad sigue uniéndose a una figura literaria, alegoría de la caverna, que por tanto necesita una interpretación y una reactualización permanentes? ¿O, por el contrario, la democracia ha acabado con la alegoría de la caverna y ya no hace falta ninguna reactualización ni interpretación de la caverna porque ya no hay caverna?
Yeah, I don't see that the cave is in any way conditioned by the political circumstances in which you live. What he says very clearly is that what makes us cave dwellers is not the regime that we live under or the particular ideology, whether it's communist, fascist, or democratic. It's that we're locked in a body. We're locked in this ridiculous little world where, you know, William Altman is supposed to have some kind of reality, and that we walk around encased in this world that we know nothing about, and confronted with the absurdity of human existence, we gradually learn to treat ourselves as if we were really existent and very important things. What makes us cave dwellers is not that we're being lied to by Donald Trump or by Francisco Franco or being educated by Antonio Lastra or William Altman. It's the human condition to be blinded by your senses, not to realize the things that are truly important.
Should I?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot.
Lo que dice es que él considera que ser habitantes de la caverna no es una cuestión del marco político en el que te encuentres, sino que es una cuestión del marco físico en el que estás. Estás aprisionado en un cuerpo, estás aprisionado en una realidad sensible, y darse cuenta de la poca importancia de tu existencia en ese marco es lo que te hace darte cuenta, no las políticas absurdas de Trump o de Franco que le dé clase a Antonio Lastra o que le dé clase al profesor Altman, sino que el estar en la caverna es algo que no tiene nada que ver con todo eso.
I mean, now on the question of, you know, our democratic friends objecting to the fact that we like Plato, I think it is fair to say that Aristocles, the son of Ariston, was born to be and remained an elitist. The difference is that what he realized is the most elite thing a person could do is serve other people.
Sobre aquellos demócratas que consideran que estudiar a Platón no es tan bueno como parece, él nos hace recordar que Aristócles, el hijo de Aristón, nació en la élite y por tanto buscaba elitismo, pero se dio cuenta de que la cosa más elitista que se puede hacer es servir a los demás.
What we used to call noblesse oblige.
Lo que llamamos que nobleza obliga.
So, but it's not that he didn't remain an elitist.
No es que no siguiera siendo un elitista.
It's nobler to serve others.
Es más noble servir a otros.
It's base to serve yourself.
Es mejor que servirse.
It's slavish to think of only your own good.
Es estupendo pensar en tu propio bien.
Pero, y me adelanto a la pregunta del juez Clement, con permiso. Si efectivamente nos encontramos con que el filósofo es algún tipo de noble, de Nietzscheano,
Antitipo de noble?
aristócrata, vornimes Geist, as Nietzsche said. Entonces no es esa situación del filósofo mentor, guía, teacher, la que en el fondo está estableciendo una superioridad, aunque solamente sea para servir, para educar, para sacar de la caverna, una superioridad que aunque no tenga que ver con el régimen político, que la propia situación democrática no puede reconocer, salvo a riesgo de dejar de ser un régimen fundamentalmente igualitario?
I missed that a little bit. What was that?
The thing is, well, if we think of the philosopher, this person who is a little bit up to be able to do all that, isn't it proper of a philosopher to embody and to put a little bit higher from the rest something that democratic system couldn't allow, being so equalitarian?
Well,
It's very simple. Is the answer of Socrates to the people of Athens, I'm the best. I'm better than
than the laws of Athens in the Apology.
Yeah, I don't see that. Let me see. I had a very clear sense before you said that of what I wanted to say. The beauty of Platonism. So let's leave aside what Socrates thought, shall we, for just a minute. The beauty of Platonism is that the only thing that's good is the idea of the good.
La belleza del platonismo es que lo único bueno es la idea de bien.
And that as long as we keep that in mind,
Mientras mantengamos eso en mente,
then none of us is any closer to the good than anybody else.
entonces nadie estará más cerca del bien que cualquiera de nosotros.
Some of us might be aware that we're inferior to it,
Algunos podemos darnos cuenta de que somos inferiores a esa idea.
and others might think that they're superior to others.
Y algunos pueden pensar que son superiores a otros.
But I don't see that Plato fits into that category.
Pero no creo que Platón entre en
He was a
esa
noble
categoría.
guy that was born to be a rich and powerful man.
Era un hombre noble que nació para ser rico y poderoso.
That, if I'm correct,
Pero si tengo razón,
spent his life writing dialogues for 15-year-old, 16-year-old kids.
empleó su vida en escribir diálogos para chavales de 15 y 16 años.
Now, I'm not denying that he knew he would be famous for doing it.
No niego que sabía que iba a ser famoso por hacerlo.
And I don't want to say that he didn't have what we modernly call an ego.
Y no voy a decir que él no tenía lo que ahora llamaríamos
But
un
then
ego.
any of you that are school teachers know about this.
Pero cualquiera de vosotros que sois profesores de escuela sabéis sobre esto.
Because when one school teacher says about another school teacher,
Porque lo que un profesor de escuela dice sobre otro,
that guy's got an ego.
bueno, pues hace que ese señor tenga algo de ego.
Who doesn't?
¿Y quién no?
Nobody stands up in front of a classroom that doesn't have an ego.
Nadie está delante de una clase sin tener ego.
It takes some guts to stand up in front of a class and act as if you've got something to teach these kids.
Conlleva agallas ponerse delante. de
And
una
that goes
clase.
whether you're teaching them philosophy or athletics,
Da igual que enseñas filosofía o educación física.
or cooking or calculus.
O cálculo.
So there's a certain elitism built into the teaching profession.
Así que sí que hay algo de elitismo en la profesión de profesor.
I have something worth teaching you,
Tengo algo que merece la pena enseñaros.
but I'm not trying to make any money by doing it. I'm not trying to take advantage of you.
Pero no me voy a aprovechar de vosotros.
I'm trying to share my knowledge with you to make your life better.
Estoy intentando compartir mi conocimiento para hacer vuestras vidas mejor.
Now, if that's elitism,
Si eso es elitismo,
Primero un detalle, en el orden de composición, el lugar de república no sé exactamente cuál es, porque está en el medio, me gustaría una aclaración.
Eso.
Y a propósito de esto mismo, usted ha hablado de la proximidad de república y sofista. A menudo y yo simpatizo con esta idea, a menudo se ha contrapuesto el pluralismo de géneros supremos del sofista con el monismo de la república y de la idea de bien. Entonces esta proximidad a mí no sé cómo decirlo, me chirría, no me convence. Mi propuesta, mi pregunta es que en república no es el bien lo único importante. Junto con el sol está la luz del sol, está el conocimiento, está la verdad. Y en la analogía de la caverna, cuando el prisionero mira hacia el cielo, no ve solo la luna, no ve solo el sol, ve todas las cosas superiores, ve las estrellas, hay más cosas, aunque el bien esté más allá de la esencia, hay otros, lo que podríamos decir con la terminología del sofista, hay otros géneros supremos, y por eso Platón no es Parménides.
well, gracias por la pregunta. Increíble que señor fala con claridad extremamente. Eu entende essa pergunta, mas eu não posso responder. Difícil pergunta. Obrigado. Thank you for the question. It was very clearly phrased. I think I understood exactly what you asked. I'm a little at a loss as to how to answer it. I'll try. The one thing I don't think I understood in what you said was you used the word monismo to refer to the sole good of the idea of the good.
Una cosa que no entiendo de lo que has dicho es que utilizas la palabra monismo para hablar de la unidad del bien.
I would. Plato is many things, but a monist he's not.
Platón es muchas cosas, pero no un monista.
He's a dualist,
Él es un dualista.
and so am I.
Y él también.
Most deep thinkers are not dualists.
Muchos pensadores profundos no son dualistas.
Or if they are dualists, they're only dualists so that they can turn them into a greater one.
Pero sí lo son para llegar a una unidad superior.
And so whether it's no form without substance,
Por tanto, no hay forma sin sustancia,
or whether it's no yin without yang,
no hay yin sin yang.
they always seem to divide things to combine them.
Todos dividen para combinar después.
Now I take the idea of the good to be the basis of dualism,
Él considera que la idea de bien es la base del dualismo.
a source of excellence well beyond us.
Una fuente de excelencia que está por encima de nosotros.
But in calling attention to the centrality of the Republic, as Senor did,
Pero poniendo el foco en la centralidad de la República, como has hecho,
and then bringing up the sophist,
y trayendo el sofista,
you'll notice that as the Republic is the center of my scheme,
te darás cuenta de por qué la República es el centro de su esquema.
that banquete and sophistes are the center of the other two halves of it.
Que el banquete y el sofista son los centros de las otras dos mitades.
Now, I'm not exactly sure what to make of that,
No estoy seguro que saco de todo esto,
but it does go along with the way I've arranged the dialogues.
pero se va bien con la forma en la que él ha organizado los diálogos.
As to your reference to the stars and the moon,
En cuanto a tu referencia a las estrellas y a la luna,
I would tend to think that's taking the allegory a little too literally,
quizá estás tomando la alegoría demasiado
but
literalmente,
you may have a point.
pero quizá tengas razón.
Certainly, one way to think about it would be through Cicero.
Una forma para pensar sobre ello sería a través de Cicerón.
But I think that my final conclusion
Yo creo que mi conclusión final
is that the great clarity of your expression in the question
es que la gran claridad de tu expresión en la pregunta
was very incommensurate with my ability to answer it.
Era muy inconmensurable con su habilidad para responder.
So that when I'm finally asked a question in Spanish that I understand what the question is,
Así que al final, cuando alguien me hace una pregunta en español que puedo entender
I find it an
perfectamente,
impossible question to answer.
resulta que es la pregunta imposible de responder.
So thank you very much.
Así que muchas gracias.
Gracias por su sentido del humor. Y solo aclarar que cuando he hablado del monismo de la República, lo he dicho mal seguramente, quería referirme a que hay una única idea superior por encima de todas, mientras que en el sofista no es así. Hay varios géneros superiores.
Well, I was just talking to Anna at the restaurant, and maybe a few others about my favorite passage in the Sophistes is about the late learners.
Hablaba hace un rato sobre que su pasaje favorito en el sofista es sobre aquellos que aprenden tardíamente.
And of course, the Eleatic stranger makes fun of them.
Y por supuesto el extraño eleata se ríe de ello.
And he says that we have provided a feast and a festival
Y dice que han provisto una fiesta y un festival
for children and late learners.
para niños y aquellos que aprenden un poco tarde.
And these morons,
Y estos estúpidos
they think that the one cannot be many,
piensan que lo uno no puede ser mucho
and the many cannot be one,
y que lo mucho no puede ser uno
and that there's no such thing as a good man,
y de que no hay tal cosa como un buen hombre
because only the good is good.
porque solo lo bueno es bueno.
And they are ridiculous,
Y son ridículos,
says the Eleatic stranger.
dice el extraño eleata.
I have to admit something to you today.
Debo admitir algo ante vosotros.
I'm a late learner.
Soy uno de los que aprenden tarde.
The first time I read The Sophist and the Statesman,
La primera vez que leyó el sofista,
I tried to find them to be platonic. I tried to find them to be platonic.
intentó encontrarlos platónicos,
I tried to like them.
intentó que le gustaran,
Despite my initial revulsion to that talk about fishing,
a pesar de su disgusto por esa charla inicial sobre la pesca.
I gave Plato the benefit of the doubt.
Le dio a Platón el beneficio de la duda.
He's a great man.
Es un gran hombre.
He's talking about fishing.
Y habla sobre pesca.
Maybe it's just about bifurcation.
Quizá es un tipo de bifurcación.
Maybe bifurcation is a good thing.
Quizá bifurcación es una buena cosa.
But then when I reflected that he never bifurcated being from becoming,
Pero cuando se dio cuenta de que nunca había una bifurcación
never
entre ser
bifurcated the
y
eternal from the temporal,
convertirse,
never bifurcated that from that, I began to lose faith in him.
empezó a perder fe en él.
And what I've decided is that teaching philosophy, teaching Plato,
Y lo que decidió es que enseñar filosofía y enseñar
is a little
Platón
bit like a dialogue between a late learner and a kid.
es como un diálogo entre uno que aprende tarde
I-
and a what?
And a kid is a student.
Y un niño.
I used to be fooled.
Solía ser tonto,
I was blind,
estaba ciego,
but now I see.
pero ahora veo.
So that simple statement that only the one is not many and the many is not one,
Solo esa frase de que lo uno no son muchas cosas y muchas cosas no es uno,
is quite literally all you need to know
es literalmente todo lo que debes saber
to think yourself out of the puzzles of the Philebus,
para salir de los puzzles del filebo,
out of the statesman,
fuera del político,
out of the laws,
fuera de las leyes,
if you just keep that simple fact in mind.
si mantienes ese simple hecho en mente
And as for only the good being the good,
y solo pides que lo bueno sea lo bueno,
that means that none of us is any closer to it than anybody else,
significa que ninguno de nosotros está más cerca,
which was the basis of my answer to Professor Lastra.
que eran las bases de la
And that a
respuesta,
good man
y que un buen hombre
is not the point.
no es lo importante.
The point is for all of us, flawed as we are,
Lo importante es que todos nosotros con
to
nuestros
do
faltas
something noble for a change.
hagamos algo noble para variar.
And even if we do other things that aren't so noble,
E incluso si hacemos alguna otra
well, at
otras
least we've
cosas que
done
no son
something
tan
right.
nobles, por lo menos que hagamos algo que esté bien.
I might also add that I'm very fond of the late learner's passage,
Debería decir que estoy muy orgulloso de ese pasaje,
because the two things that the late learners know
porque aquellos que llegan tarde al aprendizaje
is
saben
the only proof text in Plato
es que lo único que pasa el test de la verdad en Platón
that refutes the Tübingen school,
that refutes what? Sorry?
that refutes the school of Tübingen.
Que refuta la escuela de Tubinga,
Because the one is different from the good,
porque lo uno es diferente de lo bueno,
which ends up being pretty important.
lo que acaba siendo muy importante.
I should indicate that I truly believe
Debería indicar que verdaderamente cree
all of the things that Conrad Geiser believed that Aristotle said that Plato said.
todas las cosas que Conrad Geiser pensaba, que Aristóteles pensaba que Platón dijo.
I do believe that Plato gave a lecture saying that the idea of the good is the one.
Él está convencido de que Platón dio una conferencia sobre que la idea de bien es lo uno.
And I do believe that he said that a point was an indivisible line.
Y cree que dijo que un punto es una línea indivisible.
And I think he did say that there were some numbers that were unaddable.
Y también cree que dijo que había algunos números que son incomibles.
But I think he said all of those things to test the students' awareness.
Pero cree que dijo todo eso para probar si los estudiantes estaban despiertos.
Because in fact, all numbers are addable.
Porque de hecho todos los números son comestibles.
And in fact, that anything is a line is by definition indivisible. I mean, anything that is a line is by definition divisible.
Sí, creo que no comestibles no era el tema, pero habéis seguido de qué va el rollo de los números, ¿no?
And oh,
No, it's okay. The numbers were
that
the numbers are unedible.
yeah, unaddable.
Oh, sorry, edible. Okay, excuse me. Que no se pueden sumar. Sorry, I thought edible, not edible. Sorry.
Okay. Because, you know, like, if numbers are unaddable, like if there's the idea of 7, you can't add it to the idea of 5.
Porque si no puedes sumar los números, no puedes sumar 5 a 7.
But Plato knows, and everybody that teaches ancient philosophy should know too,
Pero Platón sabe, y todos los que enseñan filosofía antigua saben,
that Plato didn't think that 1 was a number.
que Platón no pensaba que el 1 fuera un número.
So that the whole project of pre-Socratic
Así
philosophy,
que todo el proyecto de la filosofía
to figure out the one thing that all things are,
encontrar aquella cosa única que todo
doesn't
es,
have anything to do with whether water is a better definition than air,
ni siquiera tiene que ver con
or
si
air
el
is a
agua
better definition than
es
logos,
mejor que aire o que si
or
el aire
logos
mejor
is
que
a different,
logos,
better
o logos
definition
es
than
mejor
Yumama.
que Yumama.
It doesn't matter.
No importa.
Because the basic problem is that all things cannot possibly be one.
Porque lo importante es que todas las cosas no pueden ser
And of
una
course, this
unidad.
is a wonderful feature of being from Los Estados Unidos.
Y esto es una buena cosa de ser de Estados Unidos.
Because outside of my stupid country,
Porque fuera de su estúpido país,
everybody in the world knows that die Vereinigten Staaten is plural.
todo el mundo sabe que eso es plural.
Und sind is the verb that must be applied to a plural verb.
Y todo eso.
Now, don't get me. I am a patriot.
Es un patriota,
but I don't believe that the United States is the greatest country on earth.
Pero no piensa que los Estados Unidos sean el país más grande de la
I
Tierra.
believe that the United States are the greatest country on earth. No, just kidding.
Piensa que los Estados Unidos son.
In other words, the problem of the one and the many is a good thing to get across, because what Plato doesn't think is that all things are one, and the reason that he doesn't think that all things are one is because they aren't. Like, they aren't. They aren't. And so that's a really simple thing. And if I could offer you one little gem that I've thought up over the years, is I used to say to my students,
Ahora voy a decir algo que suele decir a sus estudiantes.
I can't give you a number of reasons why Plato did not think that one is a number.
Te puedo dar un número de razones, unas cuantas razones por las que Platón no
I can't give you a
no
number of
era un
them.
número.
I can only give you one.
Te puedo dar una nada más.
I just did.
Lo acabo de hacer.
So that tiny little thing, that the one cannot be many and the many cannot be one, it looks so simple. And you read in history books about the problem of the one and the many. If you understand that little truth, it takes you through all the difficult passages in all the difficult dialogues.
Si entiendes eso de que lo múltiple no puede ser lo uno y viceversa, si entiendes eso te llevará a través de todos los pasajes difíciles.
And the reason that the Philebus follows the Parmenides in my system
Y el motivo de que el Filebo sigue al Parménides en su sistema
is that the purpose of the Parmenides
es el propósito del Parménides
is to teach you that the one is not many and the many is not one.
es enseñarte que lo uno no es lo múltiple y lo múltiple no es lo
That the
uno.
one that is truly one doesn't exist.
Que lo uno que es verdaderamente uno no
And the
existe.
one that does exist isn't one.
Y lo uno que de verdad existe no es uno.
And if you know that,
Y si sabes eso,
all the puzzles in the Philebus melt away.
todos los puzzles del Filebo
Because again and
desaparecen.
again he's talking about combining things into one.
Porque de nuevo está hablando de combinar todo
And
en
that, of
uno.
course, is the one thing that cannot be.
Y por supuesto, esa unidad es lo que no puede existir.
It's interesting I know you've had your own terrible civil war here in Spain.
Sé que sabe que tuvimos nuestra propia terrible guerra civil
In the United States of America
en los Estados Unidos de América.
was never referred to as a singular thing
Nunca se había llamado una cosa en singular
before the Civil War.
hasta la guerra civil.
As Walt Whitman once said,
Como Walt Whitman dijo una vez,
the United States are
los Estados Unidos son
perhaps the greatest poem.
Quizá el poema más grande.
So we've forgotten that.
Así que hemos olvidado esto.
And so would the Greeks.
Y también lo hicieron los griegos.
Because if you know any classical Greek, you should know that a neuter nominative
Porque si conoces cualquier griego clásico, sabrás que el neutro es nominativo.
neuter nominativo, as in the trees, ta dendra, takes a singular verb. So that the problem of the one and the many is built into the Greek language, and Plato thought his way out of it. And it doesn't take a PhD. And that's why Book 7 of the Republic is only about the one. Because if you see the beauty of the one, and this is something that can be taught in any class,
La belleza del uno.
is the beauty. Look, everything in our world has 3 dimensions.
Todo nuestro mundo tiene 3 dimensiones.
There is nothing so thin
No hay
that it
nada.
doesn't have 3 dimensions.
No hay nada tan delgadito que no tenga 3 dimensiones.
The thinnest piece of paper,
La más delgada, el más delgado trozo de papel
the finest piece of thread,
o de hilo
has 3 dimensions.
tiene 3 dimensiones.
As soon as you step into 2 dimensions,
En cuanto vas a las 2
you've stepped
dimensiones,
into unreality.
llegas a lo no real.
And when you step into 1
Y
dimension,
cuando llegas a la
you've stepped
dimensión,
even further into it.
estás más lejos en la no realidad.
And of course, when you're talking about something that has no dimensions at
Y
all,
cuando hablas de algo sin
like a
dimensiones,
point,
como un punto,
you're talking about a deep level of non-existence.
estás hablando de un nivel profundo de no
If
existencia.
existence is the kind of thing that is physical.
Si la existencia es aquello que es físico.
What Plato realized is that mathematics was very useful
Lo que se dio cuenta Platón es que las matemáticas eran muy útiles
for breaking an unblinking allegiance to what is physical.
para romper esa esa creencia sobre lo que era físico.
And that unblinking reliance on what is physical
Y esa confianza en lo que es físico
is what makes us prisoners of the cave.
es lo que nos hace prisioneros. En la
Thinking
cueva.
abstractly
Pensar en abstracto
is what we should all be teaching our students.
es lo que deberíamos estar enseñando a nuestros alumnos.
And what I learned in teaching my learning disabled students in the slowest classes in my school
Y lo que aprendí enseñando a aquellos estudiantes más lentos en mi clase para
is that there literally does not exist a student that cannot think abstractly.
es que literalmente no existe estudiante que no pueda pensar en abstracto.
I mean, we're human beings.
Somos seres humanos.
As soon as you say the word doggy,
En cuanto dices perrito,
you're thinking abstractly.
piensas en abstracto,
Because you're not talking about that dog at that instant and that moment.
porque no hablas de un perro en particular.
You quickly learn that there are a lot of doggies in the world.
Aprendes rápidamente que hay un montón de perritos.
Welcome to the world of abstract thinking.
Bienvenido al mundo del pensamiento abstracto.
You know, I'm sure you know the old example about how the Eskimos have, 37 different words for what we call snow.
¿Sabéis el ejemplo de que los esquimales tienen 37 palabras distintas por lo que nosotros llamamos nieve?
And yet they don't have one word that means snow.
Y todavía no tienen una sola que signifique nieve.
There's the slippery snow.
Ahí está la nieve,
There's the pellet-like snow.
otro tipo de nieve.
There's the snow that's really good for building igloos.
Una más.
But because they live in a snowy place,
Porque viven en un sitio rodeado de
they don't know any alternative to snow.
no tienen
It's not built
alternativa
into their
para la nieve.
language.
No hay esa alternativa en su
There are
idioma.
many examples of how we're prisoners of our own boxes,
Hay muchos ejemplos de cómo somos prisioneros de nuestras propias
and there are as
cajas.
many caves as there are prisons.
Y hay muchas cuevas donde hay
The
prisioneros.
most important thing you can teach your students
Lo más importante que podéis enseñarle a vuestros
is
estudiantes
to teach them that something that they think is right is wrong.
es enseñarles que algo que ellos creen que es correcto.
I used to begin all my
erróneo.
classes by writing the word etymology up on the classboard,
He empezado muchas clases escribiendo la palabra etimología en la pizarra,
preferably with chalk,
preferiblemente con tiza.
because Rick and I hate whiteboards as opposed to chalkboards.
Porque odiamos las pizarras blancas, preferimos la tiza.
And so I would write etymology on the board, and I would ask my students, which is it better to be, smart or stupid?
Y entonces les preguntaba después de escribir etimología, ¿qué es mejor ser listo o estúpido?
And then I would say that the English word smart, which I take it means listo,
Y entonces les explicaba que la palabra smart, que significa listo,
has an etymology that goes back to the German word for pain,
tiene una etimología que
Schmerz.
lleva hasta la palabra alemana Schmerz, que
And that-
significa dolor.
and that when you cut your finger and get some lemon juice or vinegar in it,
Entonces cuando te cortas un dedito y te
it
pones
smarts for just that reason.
vinagre o zumo de limón, Smarts.
And the
por
way
esa
you get a
razón.
military unit to look smart
Y la forma en la que logras que
is that you apply pain to them.
que una unidad militar aparezca. Aquí hay un juego de palabras entre smart, listo, y smart, elegante, bien puesto, es a través de dolor.
You whip them into shape,
Los golpeas para que alcancen la buena forma,
literally.
literalmente.
Okay, so that's what smart means.
Eso es lo que significa
And
smart.
as for stupid,
Y estúpido,
that is the Latin word stupido stupidare, which means to be gape-mouthed in silent astonishment.
ok, estúpido viene del latín, estúpido, stupidare, que significa tener la boca abierta de lo sorprendido que estás.
And after completing my lecture on these points, as the bell was about to ring, on the first day of class, what I would be doing in the interstices of the class is learning the names of all my students. In other words, teaching them how to learn, going through 3 or 4 at a time, going back over them again and again and again, till I knew every student at the end of the first day. It's a technique that worked very well for me as a teacher. I would strongly recommend learning the names of all your students on the first day by demonstrating how to learn. But repetition doesn't come naturally. It's not because you already know them. You don't have to be smart to do it. As I say to my students, you're never going to be smart until you start treating yourself as if you were stupid.
Lo que
At
hacía entre las clases era intentar aprender el nombre de todos los estudiantes de memoria para enseñarles cómo se aprende. En grupos de 3, repetir hasta que al final del día se sabía el nombre de todos, para demostrarles que la repetición es una forma de estudio que no viene de forma natural, que nunca llegarían a ser listos hasta que no se trataran a sí mismos como estúpidos.
And so at the end of the class, before I would greet them by name as they left my classroom, what I would end with before the bell rang
Y al final de la clase, según les iba saludando a la salida por su nombre ya a cada uno,
I'd say, let's return to the question of whether it's better to be smart or stupid, shall we?
volvamos a la pregunta sobre qué es mejor. O sea,
So let me
smart
ask you this
o
question
stupid.
now.
Así que os pregunto esta cuestión.
Which kind of student do you think I'd prefer to have in my class?
¿Qué tipo de estudiantes pensáis que él prefiere tener en clase?
Student A says,
Estudiantes que sacan 10. Sorry.
one student says,
Oh, right.
one
sorry.
kind of student says,
Okay. Un tipo de estudiantes dijo,
Mr. Altman, you have given us the etymology of smart and stupid today. Will we be having a quiz on that tomorrow?
uno era el empollón que dijo, bueno, nos ha dicho la etimología, ¿hay un examen de esto mañana?
And the other student goes, shh, fuck, man, that was so fucking interesting.
Y otro decía, coño, qué interesante ha sido todo esto.
Which do you think I'd rather have in my class?
¿Cuál pensáis que preferiría tener?
I don't know about the third. Those were the two. You know that as many of you, if you go into teaching and they give you pedagogy classes, I certainly had to take them, but I really did have to say I tried to never let them interfere with my teaching.
Si vais a ser profesores y os dan clases de pedagogía, él tuvo que sufrirlas. Debe deciros que nunca permitió que interfirieran en su forma de enseñar.
And although I understand more about Plato than I did then,
Y pese a que ahora entiende mucho más de Platón que
it was Plato that from the beginning taught me everything I know about how to teach.
fue Platón el que le enseñó desde el principio cómo enseñar.
Let me just give you one last example before we go.
Os voy a poner un último ejemplo antes de ir.
In the Dialogue de Euthydemus,
En el Eutidemo
there is an interesting passage where Socrates makes a very curious speech that begins with the very humorous words, I am a lesser man than Hercules.
hay un pasaje muy interesante en el que Sócrates comienza con unas palabras diciendo soy un hombre menor, peor que Hércules.
The joke, of course, being, who isn't?
El chiste es, bueno, ¿y quién no?
It's like saying Xenophon isn't as great a writer as Plato.
Es como decir Xenofonte no es tan buen escritor como Platón.
Who is?
¿Quién lo es?
Okay, so he's a lesser man than Hercules because when Hercules had to fight against the Hydra and the crab, he could call on help.
Es un hombre peor que Hércules porque cuando tuvo que luchar contra la hidra y el crab, el cangrejo, gracias, pudo pedir ayuda.
And the name of this helper was Iolaus.
Y el nombre de ese que le ayuda es Iolaus.
And in the myth, Iolaus came and helped Hercules.
Y Iolaus fue en su ayuda.
And Socrates says, if I were to call on my Iolaus, he'd probably do more harm than good.
Y Sócrates dice, si yo tuviera que llamar a mi Iolaus, haría más daño que favor.
A few Stephanos pages later,
Unas cuantas páginas más tarde,
a young man by the name of Ctesippus,
un joven llamado Clésipo,
who wants to show off for his boyfriend,
que quiere pavonearse delante de su amigo,
jumps into the argument to help Socrates,
se lanza a la argumentación para ayudar a Sócrates
and proclaims loudly, your Iolaus is here.
y dice en voz alta, tu Ioleo está aquí.
In 3 quick exchanges,
En 3 rápidos intercambios,
he uses heuristic and sophistical arguments to beat the sophists.
utiliza heurísticos y... Sorry, heuristics.
He uses fallacious and sophistic arguments to beat the sophists.
Heurísticos y argumentos sofísticos para vencer a los sofistas.
And this has split the reception of this passage into 2 groups.
Y esto ha dividido la recepción de este pasaje en 2 grupos de personas.
One group says that if Ctesippus is Iolaus, he's a bad guy because by using the sophistic tricks, it proves that he's a bad guy.
Si este muchacho es la ayuda de Sócrates, es un mal tipo porque está utilizando los trucos sofistas para luchar precisamente contra lo que se supone que está luchando.
The other group,
El otro grupo,
who think that beating the sophists at their own game was good,
que piensa que ganar a los sofistas con sus propias malas artes está bien,
deny that Iolaus was Ctesippus.
niega que Iolaus fuera Crisipo.
Because Socrates says the Eleus would do more harm than good.
Porque Sócrates había dicho que esa ayuda le haría más mal que bien.
If Ctesippus did good, he can't be Eleus.
Por tanto, si este chaval hizo bien, pues no sería.
And if Ctesippus does bad,
y si lo ha hecho mal,
only then can he be Eleus.
Entonces podría ser Iolaos.
Whereas anybody that's ever taught, especially adolescent boys,
mientras todos los que hemos tenido que enseñarle a los niños adolescentes,
although thanks to Title IX, in the United States of America, the reason that, what's the name of that beautiful purple-haired lady that just won the World Cup? What's her name? Our American football star?
La futbolista del pelo púrpura que ganó la copa que le dijo a Trump que iría a la casa.
Well, anyway, she has a name. You don't know. But you did hear that the United States of American girls won the World Cup.
Habéis oído que las chicas americanas han ganado la.
Our men can't play football at all.
Y que los hombres americanos
but our women played well.
Pero las mujeres
we beat the whole world.
Han vencido al mundo entero.
And so now it's not just teaching adolescent boys.
Así que ahora ya no solamente.
Because more and more of our women are just as competitive as the boys are.
Ya no hay que educar solamente a niños porque cada vez.
And why shouldn't they be?
Las mujeres son más competitivas y por qué no habrían de ser.
And anybody that has to teach a competitive kid.
Cualquier persona que tiene que enseñar a un chaval competitivo o chavala.
Knows that saying, dude. If you try to take my class, you're not going to last a week.
Sabe la frase de chaval, si vas a venir a mi clase,
no
vas a durar una
semana. My advanced philosophy class is way over your head.
Mi clase de filosofía avanzada está hasta los topes.
You're going to fail the first quiz and drop out.
Vas a suspender el primer examen y te vas a pirar.
Go back to taking an easy class because this one's too tough for you.
Pírate una fácil, payaso.
Any good teacher knows that that's a challenge.
Cualquier profesor sabe que eso es un reto.
And it's designed to get the student to say, "Fuck you, Mr. Altman."
Y que está diseñado para que el estudiante diga que te joda.
I'm going to show you.
Te voy a demostrar.
I'm going to beat you.
Te voy a vencer.
Because of course the beauty of being a teacher.
Porque la belleza de ser profesor.
Is that when you teach a kid to play, for example, chess.
Es que cuando le enseñas a un estudiante, por ejemplo.
And you beat them and beat them and beat them and beat them while playing chess.
Ajedrez. Y le vences una y otra vez.
That the day they finally beat you.
El día en que finalmente te vencen.
That's the first day you win.
Es el primer día en que tú has ganado.
Una pregunta más. Sí.
Oh, good.
Only the last question.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I am delighted with your conference, with your contribution. But why do you include rivals as Plato dialogues?
Oh.
In my opinion, is the most contemporary dialogues of Plato today, because the controversial between philosopher knowledge and scientific knowledge is the best contemporary topic. Why do you include? Because in Europe there are a tradition to consider that rivals is an Aristotelian dialogue and not Plato dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question.
Pregunta sobre por qué considera que Los rivales es un diálogo platónico. Dice que es de los más contemporáneos porque es la rivalidad entre el conocimiento científico y filosófico, y que en Europa se suele pensar que es más algo aristotélico que platónico.
I think you can have no idea of how moved I am by your question.
Creo que no tienen ni idea de lo conmovido que estoy por tu pregunta.
It wouldn't seem like a question that would invoke a great deal of emotion.
No parecería una pregunta que fuera a provocar tanta emoción.
But it does.
Pero lo hace.
It is a splendid example of what I believe is called divine dispensation or theomoira.
Es un ejemplo fantástico de lo que él llama theomoira o donación divina o dispensación divina.
Because the most interesting paper that was read in Paris on the subject of Parmenides
porque el trabajo más importante que se ha leído en París, de donde viene de una conferencia,
was written by a German scholar from the University of Tübingen,
estaba escrito por un profesor de Tübingen,
whose name was Irmgard Männlein Robert.
con ese nombre.
And Irmgard Männlein Robert and I have corresponded over the years
Y este señor y él se han carteado durante años,
because she has written numerous articles about how the rivalis is not genuine.
porque él ha escrito muchos artículos sobre cómo los rivales no es un artículo genuinamente platónico.
Irmgard appeared in Paris.
Engard apareció en París.
She didn't say anything about rivalis.
Ella no habló para nada de los rivales.
She was talking about Parmenides.
Hablaba del Parménides.
And she gave a paper that was called Der ferne Gott.
Y dio una clase llamada Der ferne Gott.
The distant God.
El Dios distante.
And what she was doing was looking at a passage in the Parmenides, the final objection in the first part.
Ella se fijaba en la última objeción de la primera parte del Parménides,
where some God language is used.
Donde algún idioma que tiene que ver con Dios es utilizado.
And the point being that even if there are forms,
y el punto es que incluso cuando hay formas,
and if they are separate,
y si están separadas,
there can be no knowledge of them,
no puede haber
because they're
conocimiento
too
sobre
high
ellas,
for us.
porque son demasiado altas para nosotros.
And that therefore, that if there is this highest knowledge that accesses the forms,
y por tanto, si el más alto de los conocimientos es el que accede a las formas,
even if it is the most accurate kind of knowledge,
incluso si es el más justo,
it can be in no sense despotea over us.
No puede haber ningún tipo de despotea sobre nosotros.
It can exercise no despotism over us.
No puede ejercer despotismo sobre
because
nosotros.
It's so distant from us and therefore cannot rule us.
Porque es muy distante a nosotros y por tanto no nos puede gobernar.
And by delivering this argument, Irmgard achieved three things.
Y dando este argumento, esta buena señora consiguió tres cosas.
Number one, she confirmed my long-held suspicion that Plato is the originator of the doctrine of the separation of church and state.
Confirmó su largamente acariciada teoría de que Platón es el originador de la teoría de la división entre Iglesia y Estado.
Because as Thomas Jefferson pointed out in the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom,
porque como Thomas Jefferson dijo en el Estatuto de Libertades Religiosas de Virginia,
if God had wanted us all to believe in God,
si Dios hubiera querido que todos creyéramos en Dios,
we would.
Lo haríamos.
And therefore, that there is no despotic knowledge as to forces us to do those things.
Y por tanto no hay ningún conocimiento despótico que nos fuerce a hacer esas cosas.
Second of all,
segundo,
she beautifully deconstructed the entire project of both the Eleatic stranger, Timaeus and Critias, and the Athenian stranger.
Hermosamente deconstruyó todo el argumento que encontramos en
Remember, I'm in a tiny minority that believes that the Athenian stranger does not speak for Plato.
Recordad que él está entre la minoría de los que piensan que el extraño ateniense no habla
that the Eleatic stranger does not speak for Plato.
Por Platón. El extranjero Eleata no habla por Platón.
That Critias does not speak for Plato.
Que Critias no habla por Platón.
And that Timaeus does not speak for Plato.
Timeo tampoco.
And what all of those guys have in common
y todo lo que tienen en común estos
is that whatever God they are talking about
es que sea el Dios del que hablan
is not der ferne Gott.
No es el Dios distante.
It's an immanent God.
Es un Dios inminente.
Immanent in the cosmos.
Inminente en el cosmos.
Immanent in the cycles of the heavens.
En los ciclos de los cielos.
Immanent in nous.
En el nous.
And immanent in nomos.
Y en el nomos.
So she had simultaneously shattered and confirmed many of I had not noticed this passage in Parmenides.
Él no conocía este pasaje en el Parménides y ella consiguió remover y confirmar.
And I had written all of these about all these dialogues without reference to Irmgard's point.
Y había leído siempre estos diálogos sin referencia al punto que intentaba hacer esta
And as if these two breakthroughs were not enough.
Y si esos dos momentos importantes no eran suficientes.
Most amazingly of all,
más sorprendentemente,
given the question of you, Professor,
dada su pregunta,
is that I felt that she had also legitimated the authenticity of the Rivalis.
Es que ella también había dado legitimidad.
The precise point on which we had argued for so many years.
De ese diálogo sobre lo que tanto habían estado discutiendo.
Because of course the definition, the attempt to define philosophy in Rivalis,
porque el intento de definir filosofía en los rivales,
fails precisely because the philosopher would need to have some kind of master techne.
Falla porque precisamente el filósofo debería tener algún tipo de técnica de maestro.
And he gives a whole lot of adjectives for what kind of techne that would have to be.
Y da un montón de adjetivos sobre esa técnica precisamente.
Basilicae, kingly, tyrannicae, and despoticae, oikonomicae. but politike, lots of them. And of course, the philosopher doesn't have those things.
Evidentemente, el filósofo no
In
tiene
other
todas
words,
esas.
that despotike techne is not accessible to us.
En el sentido de que esa tecne despótica no es accesible para nosotros.
In addition to that, I'll give you two other reasons why I believe that the Rivales well, I'll give you three. Three other reasons why the Rivales is authentic.
Tres motivos para la autenticidad de Rivales.
Number one, because it's about the rivals, one is a smart guy and one is a dumb guy.
Porque son unos rivales, uno de los cuales es listo, el otro
Or
tonto.
better yet, one is a musical guy and one is a gymnastic guy.
Mejor uno es un tipo de música y el otro de gimnasia.
It fits very snugly between the Alcibiades pair,
Se queda muy bien frente a la pareja de Alcibíades,
because Alcibiades isn't a smart guy, but he's a very athletic guy.
porque Alcibíades no es un tipo listo, pero es atlético.
It fits very well between the Alcibiades pair and the Hippias pair,
Queda muy bien entre el par de Alcibíades y del Hippias,
because Hippias is a smart guy.
porque Hippias es un tipo listo.
And of course, as you know, the word polymathia is used in the Rivales.
Y sabes que en los rivales se utiliza la palabra
And
polimacia.
Hippias major is the archetypo of the polymath.
Y, sorry, come again.
He's the archetype of the polymath.
Y él es el arquetipo del polímata.
So that's one reason. The second reason is that, this is my favorite too, the second one is that at the end of the dialogue,
La segunda y la que es su favorita es que al final del diálogo
he does not call him the musical or the gymnastic one.
no le llama el músico o el gimnasta.
He says, "E pontos demo tauta," which means, with me having said these things, homen sophos aiskuntes tois progeremenos esigesen, which means, the wise one, having been made ashamed by the things that had been said,
Habiendo dicho esto, el sabio, habiendo sido o teniendo vergüenza por las cosas que yo le he dicho,
he fell silent.
cayó.
And the ignorant one said
Y el ignorante dijo
that it was just as I had said.
lo que yo había deseado decir.
In other words, Plato uses the word hosophos and hoamathes, the very words that will be used to define Philosophia in Symposium. Remember, I'm saying that Rivales is like Greater Hippias, that follows it immediately, is all propedeutic and preparatory for the Symposium.
Utilizar unas palabras que va a utilizar en el simposio y recuerda que remember, sorry, come again. Which one?
Preparatory?
Yeah.
Oh, and the Hippias Major.
Okay, y el Hippias mayor son diálogos preparatorios.
But the passage that I like the most,
Pero el pasaje que más
and
me
this is
gusta
my third and final, is where in the first refutation it comes up that too much exercise wouldn't be good.
y es el tercer pasaje el que más le gusta, es en la primera refutación, cuando dice que demasiado ejercicio no sería
And
bueno.
as the dumb guy says,
Y como el tonto dice,
I would have thought that even a moron knew that a moderate amount of exercise was good.
hubiera dicho que hasta un estúpido diría que una moderada cantidad de ejercicio es
And they get
buena.
into an argument about who knows the moderate.
Y de nuevo empieza un argumento sobre quién conoce la moderación.
Who knows the moderate amount of drugs to give to a sick person?
¿Quién sabe la cantidad moderada de drogas que dar de alguien enfermo?
Well, that's the doctor.
Eso es el doctor.
And who's the guy that knows the moderate amount of exercise to give to an athlete?
¿Y quién sabe la moderada cantidad de
That's the
ejercicio para un
trainer.
atleta?
And
El
who's the guy
entrenador.
that knows to give the right amount of seeds to a field?
¿Y el que sabe cuánta semilla poner en un campo?
That's the farmer. And then Socrates
Yeah,
asked the following question. And from thence I asked, who is it that knows how to plant and sow just the right amount of studies in the soul? Who is that?
Y entonces Sócrates pregunta, ¿y quién sabrá quién es la cantidad, la moderada cantidad,
la medida
de conocimiento que plantar en las almas de la gente?
Now I take the answer to this question to be Plato.
Y él cree que la respuesta es Platón.
In other words, that Plato knows exactly what dialogues to teach you,
Y por tanto que Platón sabe
in what order to
exactamente
teach them,
qué diálogos enseñarte y en qué orden.
and which are too complicated and which are simple enough for somebody to understand.
Cuáles son complicados y cuáles son más simples para entender.
But what says next at 135a
Pero
is
dice
that after I asked that question,
después de que haya preguntado eso,
we were all filled with confusion.
Todos nos sentimos llenos de confusión.
Aporias mestoi. Full of aporia.
Llenos de aporía.
All of us, all three.
Los tres, todos ellos.
And I, to play with them,
Y yo, para jugar con ellos,
prospaidson autos, to play with them, I asked, well, how would you like it, I said, if, since we are in aporia, what would you think if we asked these kids here?
y dice, ya que estamos en la aporía, ¿te gustaría que le preguntáramos a estos de aquí?
To me, this is the essence of Platonic pedagogy.
Para él esa es la esencia de la pedagogía platónica.
Because at that moment, Plato breaks the frame,
Porque en ese momento Platón rompe la tercera
points to
pared
the students outside the dialogue,
y lleva a los estudiantes fuera del diálogo,
who already know enough to know that Plato is the sower of studies,
porque saben que Platón es el que
distribuidor of clothes, the sembrador de semillas, the playful master of indirection, that, shall we ask Tauti Tamarakia? Let's ask them. I think that's all I got to say.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias por la asistencia, por la participación. Habrá sucesivas jornadas. Esperemos contar en un futuro y en otros foros también de esta universidad con el profesor Altman en esta universidad. Muchísimas gracias. Levantamos la sesión.
Thank you very much.